The city never really slept. Chen Wei had learned that early in his career, 3 years of night patrols will teach a man things no academy ever could. The way neon signs bled their colors into wet asphalt. The way certain streets went quiet in a particular way that meant trouble was either just finished or just about to start. The way the city breathed differently at 2 a.m., slower, heavier, like something enormous turning over in its sleep. He liked the night shifts, like the quiet inside the patrol car, the radio keeping a low murmur, the city scrolling past the window like a film nobody was watching. His partner, Officer Deng Shuo, was asleep in the passenger seat again, technically resting his eyes, as he called it, and Chen Wei didn't bother waking him. Deng Shuo was the kind of man who did the minimum required to remain employed and not one step further. Chen Wei had stopped being surprised by that 8 months ago. He drove.
This takeout is
He
so
watched.
disappointing.
He thought
Cold
about
and
Mei
tastes
Xu,
awful.
about how she'd
Why
said
is
3 nights
nothing
ago
ever
over
good?
takeout containers going
I'm so
cold on the
tired of
coffee
this.
table that she was tired of waiting for things to get better. What things? He'd asked. She'd waved her chopsticks vaguely at the apartment, at him, at everything. He was still thinking about what she meant by that when the Bentley blew through the red light at Jianhe Avenue doing at least 30 over the limit. Chen Wei watched it happen with the particular calm of a man who has learned not to be surprised by anything after midnight. A matte black Bentley Continental, the kind of car that costs more than Chen Wei would make in the next decade, sliding through the intersection like traffic laws were a suggestion made for other people. No hesitation, no brake lights, just the quiet arrogance of a machine that costs enough to make rules optional. He hit the lights. Deng Shuo jolted awake at the siren's first pulse, blinking, hand going automatically to his belt. What is it? Bentley ran the light on Jianhe, minimum 30 over. Chen Wei was already pulling into position behind it, lights cycling blue and red across the wet street. Deng Shuo squinted at the car ahead. Something crossed his face. Not quite recognition, but something adjacent to it. Hesitation. What's the plate? Chen Wei read it off. Deng Shuo was quiet for a moment too long. Let it go, Deng Shuo said. Chen Wei glanced at him. What? Late. Could be nothing. Let it go, Wei. He ran a red at 60 in a 40 zone. There's nobody else on the street because it's 2 in the morning. That's the only reason someone isn't dead. Chen. But the Bentley was already pulling over, slowly, unhurried, the way a man pulls over when he's confident the conversation will go his way. Chen Wei parked, ran the plate through the system while he was still in the car. The vehicle came back registered to a holding company, 3 layers of corporate shell. He wrote that down, tucked it into the back of his mind. Stay here, he told Deng Shuo. Wei, seriously. Chen Wei got out of the car. The night air was cold and tasted like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Chen Wei walked toward the Bentley at the standard approach angle, slightly to the left. Enough distance, flashlight in hand. Textbook. The window came down before he reached it. The man inside was in his late 50s. Heavy face, well-maintained. The kind of heaviness that came from decades of good restaurants rather than neglect. Silver hair, cut short and precise. He was wearing a shirt that probably didn't have a visible price tag because people who bought shirts like that didn't need to know. He smelled even from 2 feet away strongly of aged baijiu and expensive cologne fighting each other to a draw. He looked at Chen Wei the way certain men look at furniture. Present, functional, beneath comment. License and registration, Chen Wei said. The man didn't move. He looked at Chen Wei's badge number with mild professional interest, the way a man reads a menu item he's already decided not to order. Do you know who I am? He said. Not aggressive, genuinely curious, the way someone asks if you've heard a famous piece of music. No, Chen Wei said. License and registration, sir. Something shifted in the man's expression. Not anger, more like a recalibration. As if Chen Wei had said something in a language he hadn't expected to hear here. He produced a license. Chen Wei took it, shone the light on it. Liang Guo Wei. The name meant nothing to him. He wrote it down. Mr. Liang, you ran a red light on Jianhe Avenue at approximately 2:14 a.m., traveling at a speed I'm estimating between 55 and 60 kilometers over the posted limit. I'm also going to need you to step out of the vehicle. Liang Guowei looked at him with something that was almost appreciation. Step out. Yes, sir. Because? Because I can smell alcohol from here, Mr. Liang, and I need to conduct a sobriety assessment. A pause. Liang looked out through the windshield at the empty, wet street, at the police lights painting the puddles blue and red, at nothing in particular. Then he opened the door and stepped out with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who is choosing to cooperate and making sure you understood the choosing part. He was taller than he looked sitting down. He stood on the pavement and looked at Chen Wei with a faint, patient smile that made Chen Wei's jaw tighten slightly. The sobriety assessment took 4 minutes. Liang failed it with the quiet dignity of a man who considered failure in this context to be a minor administrative inconvenience. Mr. Liang, I'm placing you under arrest for driving under the influence and for reckless... Young man, Liang's voice was very calm. I want you to think carefully about what you are doing right now. I am. Step around to the back of the vehicle, please. I'm trying to help you. I understand. Hands behind your back, sir. Chen Wei was reaching for the cuffs when something in the angle of the car door caught his flashlight beam wrong. A shape under the front seat. He paused, looked at Liang, looked at the shape, called it in, requested backup, requested permission for a vehicle search under probable cause, got it in 90 seconds. The firearm was a Type 92 pistol, modified, tucked in a magnetic holster under the driver's seat. No license for it in the system, no registration. Ling Guowei looked at the gun being photographed and bagged with an expression that for the first time wasn't patient. It was something else. Something colder and more careful. He looked at Chen Wei. You have no idea, he said quietly, what you just did. Chen Wei snapped the handcuffs closed. You have the right to remain silent, Mr. Liang. I strongly suggest you use it. In the patrol car, he could see Deng Shuo sitting very still, staring at his phone, not looking up, not once. Chen Wei went home at 6 in the morning, smelling like car exhaust and cold air, let himself into the apartment quietly so he wouldn't wake Mei Xu, and stood in the kitchen for a while in the gray early light, drinking water and thinking about nothing in particular. The arrest had gone cleanly. The paperwork was filed. The gun was in evidence. Everything was exactly as it should be. He didn't know why there was something at the back of his neck that felt like a door closing. He went to bed. He slept 4 hours. Then his phone rang. Chief Superintendent Hou Wei's office smelled like old tea and something vaguely chemical, the kind of smell that accumulates in rooms where difficult conversations happen regularly and the windows don't open enough. The chief sat behind his desk looking at a point slightly to the left of Chen Wei's face, which was never a good sign. Chen Wei stood. He had not been invited to sit. Last night, the chief said, you arrested a man named Liang Guowei. Yes, sir. Walk me through your decision-making. Chen Wei walked him through it. Clean, factual, sequential. The light, the speed, the odor, the assessment, the search, the firearm. Procedure followed at every step. He'd written it all down 6 hours ago. He could recite it in his sleep. The chief listened with his hands flat on the desk and his eyes on the middle distance. There's going to be a problem with the search, the chief said when Chen Wei finished. The search was within probable cause parameters. I ran it by... There's going to be a problem with the search, the chief repeated, slightly louder, slightly slower, the way a man repeats something when he wants you to understand he's not discussing the legal merits. The probable cause justification is going to be called into question. The sobriety assessment, there may be issues with how it was conducted. I'm going to need you to file an amended report. Chen Wei was quiet for a moment. An amended report, he said, correcting the procedural irregularities. There were no procedural irregularities, sir. The chief looked at him directly for the first time. His face was not unkind. It was the face of a man doing something he found distasteful because the alternative was worse, and who had made peace with that a long time ago. Chen Wei, you're a good officer. You've always been a good officer. He said it like a eulogy. I need you to file an amended report by end of day. If you do that, this goes away. If you don't, I'm not filing an amended report. Silence. Then I can't protect you from the consequences of last night. The chief looked back at his desk. You're suspended pending review, effective immediately. Hand in your badge and service weapon at the desk downstairs. He picked up his pen. That's all. Chen Wei stood there for 3 more seconds. Then he put his badge on the chief's desk, not slammed, not dropped, just placed with complete deliberate calm, and walked out. He did not take the elevator. He took the stairs, all 7 flights, because he needed the time to think and because the stairwell was empty and nobody would see whatever was happening to his face on the way down. By noon, it was not suspension, it was termination. Voluntary resignation was what they called it in the paperwork. He had not volunteered anything. But the paperwork said what the paperwork said, and the man at the HR desk wouldn't meet his eyes. And Deng Shuo, who Chen Wei passed in the corridor on the way out, looked straight ahead like a man who had decided very firmly that there was something interesting happening on the wall to his left. Chen Wei walked out of the precinct building into sharp midday sunlight with a cardboard box containing 3 years of his professional life, a coffee mug, 2 framed certifications, a photograph from a department event, and stood on the pavement for a moment, blinking. Then he took out his phone and called Mei Shu. She picked up on the 4th ring. Wei, you're usually sleeping now. Can you come home? He said. There's something I need to tell you. He made tea. He didn't know why. Habit, probably, or the need to do something with his hands. He set a cup in front of her at the kitchen table and sat across from her and told her everything in order. The arrest, the chief's office, the amended report he'd refused to write, the termination. Mei Shu listened. She was good at listening. It was one of the things he'd loved about her early on, the way she'd give you her full attention and make you feel like what you were saying mattered. She was doing that now, hands around her cup, eyes on him, fully present. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, So you just refused? He wanted me to falsify a report, to let a drunk man with an illegal weapon walk away because… Wei? She said his name like a period at the end of a sentence. Do you understand what this means? It means I kept my integrity. She looked at him then with an expression he would spend a long time afterward trying to name. Not anger, not sadness, something more practical than either of those. The expression of someone doing a calculation. We have rent due in 12 days, she said. You have 3 months of savings, maybe 4 if we cut everything. And you just made an enemy of someone powerful enough to get you fired by lunchtime. She set down her cup with a small, careful click. And you kept your integrity. Mei Shu, I'm not equipped for this. She stood up. I'm sorry, Wei. I'm genuinely not trying to be cruel, but I'm not built for this kind of life. I didn't sign up to… She stopped. Started again. I need stability. I need a future. I thought that's what we were building. We are building… With what? She looked around the apartment, then back at him. With what, Wei? He didn't have an answer that she would accept. He could feel that clearly. She went into the bedroom. He heard drawers opening. He sat at the kitchen table with his tea going cold and listened to the sounds of someone deciding they were done. She was gone by 7. Not all of her things. She'd said she'd come back for the rest when she'd figured things out, which Chen Wei understood to be the grammatical structure of a person who was not coming back. He sat in the apartment for 2 hours after she left. The takeout containers from 3 nights ago were still on the counter. He'd meant to throw them away and kept forgetting. The cup she'd used for tea was still on the table. The apartment was very quiet in the specific way that rooms get quiet when they've recently contained 2 people and now contain 1. At 9 o'clock, he picked up his phone to check something. He didn't even know what. And his thumb found her profile before his brain caught up. The most recent story was 40 minutes old. A restaurant he recognized, candlelight, a glass of wine, white her preference, and a hand across the table from hers with an expensive watch visible at the wrist, holding her fingers loosely. She'd captioned it with a single emoji, something small and warm. Chen Wei set the phone face down on the table. He sat there for a long time. They came at 11, 3 knocks. Sharp, spaced, professional, not a neighbor. Chen Wei looked through the peephole and saw 2 men in the kind of jackets that communicated a specific message. We are here in an unofficial capacity, and that is the point. He considered not opening it. Then he considered that the door was not particularly solid and opened it. The taller one spoke. He had the flat, patient affect of someone doing a job they've done many times. Mr. Chen, Mr. Liang sends his regards. I'm sure he does. He wanted you to have something to think about. He said it like an item on a list, so that future decisions come more easily. Chen Wei had time to register that the second man had moved to his right, and then something connected with the side of his ribs, and then things happened quickly and painfully for the next 90 seconds. They left without hurrying. The door closed quietly behind them. Chen Wei lay on his kitchen floor for a while, breathing in the particular way you have to breathe when your ribs have been reintroduced to themselves too forcefully. The overhead light was very white and very steady. The takeout containers were still on the counter. Everything was exactly where he'd left it. Mr. Liang sends his regards. He got up, washed his face, made a list of things he needed to do. At the top of the list he wrote, "Find somewhere else to sleep tonight." He took nothing but a bag and the clothes on his back. 2 weeks passed. He found a room in the Beigang district, small enough that he could touch both walls if he stretched his arms sideways, above a hardware store that opened at 6 a.m. and smelled like turpentine. He paid in cash. The landlord, a woman in her 60s who seemed constitutionally opposed to asking questions, gave him a key and a look that communicated she'd seen worse and minded her business about all of it. He picked up day work, loading, moving, the kind of labor that used a body and left the mind free to think. He ate cheaply. He slept enough. He did not call anyone from his old life because his old life had a very clear position on him at the moment. He thought about Mei Xu. He tried not to. He thought about her anyway. This was his failure, not hers. That was what he told himself at 3 in the morning when the hardware store below had gone quiet and the traffic outside had thinned to single headlights sweeping across the ceiling. She was scared. She'd panicked. She hadn't meant it the way it looked. People make decisions under pressure, and those decisions don't always look like the people you thought they were. He was very good at this story for about 11 days. On the 12th day, he bought flowers, white chrysanthemums because she'd once mentioned white flowers were her preference, from a stand near the metro and took the number 7 train across the city to her building, telling himself he just wanted to talk, that he wasn't trying to fix it, that he just wanted her to understand what had actually happened so she could make an informed decision. He was telling himself this as he came around the corner onto her street and saw the silver BMW parked outside her building. He knew the car. He'd seen it in her stories, the background detail he'd refused to consciously register. A silver BMW 7 Series with a personalized plate that ended in 888, the kind of plate that announced wealth and the desire to be seen announcing it. He stood on the pavement with his flowers and his very good story and felt the story come apart quietly in his hands. The building's front door opened. Mei Xu came out first. She was in a coat he hadn't seen before. Camel-colored, fitted, expensive. Her hair was different. She looked in the abstract very well. She looked like a woman whose life had recently improved. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. Something happened in her expression. Not guilt, exactly. More like someone who has been mildly startled by an inconvenient piece of furniture they thought they'd moved. Chen Wei held up the flowers. He didn't know why. Mei Xu glanced back toward the BMW's passenger window, said something. Chen Wei couldn't hear it. He was close enough to see her lips move, not close enough to hear words. The engine sound changed, from idle to intent. Chen Wei had just enough time to think, wait, and then the BMW was moving and the world tilted sideways at a speed that made no sense, and the flowers left his hand in a white scatter, and there was a sound like every thought he'd ever had ending simultaneously. Then there was nothing at all. White. That was the first thing. White ceiling, white walls, white light coming from a strip fixture above his head that hummed at a frequency just below the threshold of annoying. The kind of light that had no interest in being comfortable. The kind of light that existed purely to illuminate, without any concern for what the illumination revealed. Chen Wei lay still and took inventory. His right arm was in a cast from wrist to elbow. 3 fingers on his left hand were taped together. His ribs, he discovered this when he tried to breathe deeper than a shallow pull, had been reacquainted with each other in ways that nature had not originally intended. There was something at the back of his head, a dull geological pressure, like a continent shifting very slowly against another continent somewhere beneath his skull. He moved his eyes without moving his head. Hospital room, Single occupancy, not because anyone had paid for a private room, he understood instinctively, but because the ward was underfilled and they'd put him somewhere they could monitor him without dedicating staff to it. A monitor to his right tracked something in green lines, an IV drip. A window to his left showing a rectangle of sky the color of old dishwater. A chair beside the bed, empty. He looked at the chair for a while. It had that particular quality of emptiness that chairs get when they have been empty for some time. Not recently vacated, not waiting to be filled, just empty, in the settled and definitive way of furniture that has decided this is its permanent condition. No one had come. He closed his eyes, opened them again. The ceiling was still white. He tried to remember the sequence of events with the clinical detachment of a man filing a report on someone else's life. The flowers, white chrysanthemums, 12 of them, a detail that now struck him as both specific and useless. Meishu's face doing that thing, the sound of an engine accelerating from idle to intent. The moment between understanding what was happening and the impact, which was not long enough to be called a moment at all, really, more like the space between one word and the next in a sentence that ends badly. Then white. He did the math without wanting to. His ribs would need 6 weeks minimum, the arm, longer. The head, who knew? He was a former police officer with no employment, no savings left after 2 weeks of running, no apartment, no insurance, beyond the basic state coverage that would handle the hospital bill but nothing after. He had a bag of clothes in a rented room above a hardware store in the Baegong district, and a landlord who minded her business, which was currently his only functional relationship. He lay in the white room and felt the weight of this arrange itself on his chest like something that intended to stay. The television mounted high on the opposite wall was on, muted, no subtitles, cycling through what appeared to be a home renovation program. A man in a hard hat was gesturing enthusiastically at a gutted kitchen, then an advertisement, a car on a mountain road, a product he couldn't identify. Then another advertisement. A man in a tailored suit on a yacht, Mediterranean light, or something designed to suggest it. The man was laughing at something off camera, the easy laugh of someone for whom laughter costs nothing because everything else has already been paid for. He had a glass in his hand. Behind him, the ocean went on indefinitely. Chen Wei watched this for a while. Then the advertisement ended and the home renovation program came back and the man in the hard hat was still excited about the kitchen. On the second day, a nurse came to change the IV and told him, with the practiced gentleness of someone who delivered this kind of information regularly, that no one had called to inquire about his condition. She said it as a neutral fact, the way you'd note that the weather was overcast, and Chen Wei received it the same way. She thanked her. She left. He had been given a painkiller schedule that left him clear-headed enough to think, and medicated enough that the thinking didn't arrive with its full physical complement of sensation. This felt like a reasonable trade. He thought about what came next. The problem with thinking about what came next was that the answer kept arriving as a blank. Not uncertainty. He was familiar with uncertainty, had worked in conditions of it for 3 years. This was different. This was the specific blankness that comes when you try to project forward from a position that has been comprehensively cleared. No job, no home, no relationship. Men from Liang Guowei's operation who had demonstrated a willingness to make physical arguments. A body that currently couldn't walk to the bathroom without the wall's assistance. He ran the options. He ran them again. He ran them a third time, hoping the arithmetic would change. It didn't. On the third day, he stopped running the options. He lay in the white room and listened to the hospital sounds, the trolleys in the corridor, the low conversations at the nurse's station, the monitor tracking his heart in green lines with the patient indifference of a machine that didn't know or care what the heart had recently been through, and felt something happen inside him that he didn't immediately have a name for. It wasn't despair. He'd expected despair. He'd been waiting for it the way you wait for rain you can smell coming. But it wasn't that. It was quieter than despair and colder and more precise. It was the feeling of a man who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has finally, in the absence of any other option, set it down. Everything was gone. The job, gone. The apartment, gone. The woman, gone. The version of himself that had gone to the academy with the intention of being genuinely useful, that had refused to file an amended report, not because he was making a statement, but because he literally could not make himself do it, that had bought white chrysanthemums because he still believed, on some level, that people meant what they had once appeared to mean. That version was lying in a hospital bed with 3 taped fingers and a geological headache. Everything was gone and there was nothing left to protect. And in the absence of anything left to protect, something else became possible. He didn't know yet what to call it. He knew only that it was there, small and hard and very cold, like a stone at the bottom of a river. The river could move around it as much as it wanted. The stone was not going anywhere. He closed his eyes. He thought, if I ever get out of this room, not when, if, honestly if. Then what would I do differently? Then more quietly, more honestly, what would I become if I decided to actually become something? He fell asleep thinking about it. He woke at 2 a.m. He knew because the corridor sounds had changed to the particular nighttime frequency of a hospital at its lowest staffing point, and the room was dark except for the monitor's green pulse and the pale line under the door, and something else, something at the periphery of his vision. Not light exactly, or rather light that didn't seem to be coming from the ceiling or the monitor or the strip under the door. Blue-white, faint. The color of a screen in a darkened room except there was no screen. He blinked. It didn't go away. He blinked again, slower, thinking, concussion, obviously, this is what concussion does. This is a symptom. Make a note to mention it to the doctor in the morning. But the light didn't pulse or swim the way visual disturbances did. It held steady, and as his eyes adjusted, he became aware that it wasn't just light. It had structure, edges, lines that suggested geometry, like something was trying to assemble itself in the air in front of him. He watched it the way you watch something you don't understand but don't yet feel the need to be afraid of, carefully, patiently, and then it assembled. The interface appeared slowly, like text loading on a poor connection. First the outer frame, then sections filling left to right, then the internal elements clarifying from blur to precision. It hung in the air at the foot of his bed, translucent and perfectly still, casting no shadow and illuminating nothing, as if it existed in a layer of reality that ran parallel to the room rather than within it. Clean lines, cold blue-white, the aesthetic of something engineered rather than designed. No ornamentation, no softness, purely functional. Whatever this was, it was not trying to be beautiful. Chen Wei read it. Authority System version 1.0 user identified, Chen Wei age, 28. Current status, 0. Net worth, 4,200 yen social authority, 0/100. Network value, null assessment complete. You have lost everything a man can lose without losing himself. That line has not been crossed. This is where we begin. Initial quest activated. Stand. Objective. Exit this hospital on your own 2 feet. No assistance. Head level. Reward, plus 10 authority points. Trait unlocked. Unbreakable. Psychological pressure from others reduced by 40%. You will not flinch first. You will not break eye contact first. They will. Time limit, none. Whenever you're ready. Accept/decline. Chen Wei read it twice. Then he read the specific line again. You have lost everything a man can lose without losing himself, and held that sentence in his mind carefully like something fragile taken from a high shelf. He didn't ask himself if this was real. The question seemed beside the point. He was lying in a hospital bed at 2 in the morning with broken bones and no future and a monitor tracking his heart, and there was an interface in front of him that had, with complete accuracy, assessed his net worth at 4,200 yen. He knew this was correct because 4,200 yen was the exact amount left on his emergency card after 2 weeks of cash payments for the room above the hardware store. It was real or it wasn't. Neither answer changed the content of what it was saying. He looked at the accept/decline line at the bottom. He thought about the yacht in the advertisement, the man laughing in the Mediterranean light, the easy laugh of someone for whom laughter costs nothing. He thought about Liang Guowei on the pavement outside his Bentley, the way he'd looked at Chen Wei like furniture, the way Chief Superintendent Hao had placed his hands flat on the desk and not met his eyes and talked about amended reports with the worn fluency of a man who had been saying it for years. He thought about Mei Shu's face doing that small, practical calculation across the kitchen table. He thought about the chair beside his hospital bed, the empty chair. He raised his left hand, the one with the taped fingers, the one that worked mostly, and found the accept line in the interface. He wasn't sure what accepting meant mechanically. He had no keyboard, no touchscreen, but he held his hand near it and thought yes with the full and complete weight of everything he had just spent 3 days arriving at. The interface pulsed once, briefly warm. Quest accepted. Stand. Welcome, Chen Wei. We have been waiting for the right moment. The right moment is when a man has nothing left to lie to himself about. You are ready. The interface held for another 3 seconds. Then it faded, not switched off, more like stepped back, receded to somewhere just behind the visible, present but not displayed. The room was dark again. The monitor beeped its patient green beep. Chen Wei lay in the white room and stared at the ceiling and felt the stone at the bottom of the river and thought, with a clarity that surprised him with its completeness, I am going to become something that none of them have language for yet, not revenge. He turned the word over and set it aside. It was too small, too reactive, too much about them and not enough about him. Not survival. Survival was the floor, not the ceiling. Something else. Something that started with walking out of this room straight-backed and clean-faced and ended somewhere so far above where he was now that the distance between the 2 points didn't have a name yet. He would find the name on the way. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the car hit him, he slept without dreaming. He spent 3 more days in the hospital after that. The doctors wanted a week. He negotiated, politely with the focused courtesy of a man who has decided how things are going to go and is extending others the opportunity to align with that decision voluntarily. The attending physician, a tired woman in her 40s named Dr. Song, who had clearly developed a finely calibrated sense of which patients were going to do what they wanted regardless, looked at his charts, looked at him and said, 3 more days, then I'll clear you for discharge if the numbers hold. But the arm stays casted for 6 weeks and I want you back in 2 for a head check. He agreed. He kept his part of the deal precisely. During those 3 days, he did the things available to him. He slept as much as his body demanded and no more. He ate everything on every tray. Hospital food, badly seasoned and texturally uninspiring, consumed with the focused efficiency of someone fueling a machine rather than enjoying a meal. He did what small physical things he could, sitting up without using the bed controls, standing at the window, small movements that cost him something, and he paid without complaint. The interface appeared twice more during those 3 days, never for long. Brief updates, check-ins, something that felt less like a game mechanic and more like a presence confirming it was still there. The second appearance, authority system status. Update, day 2 of recovery. Physical condition, improving, 67%. Mental condition, stable, focused. Observation. You have not asked for sympathy from anyone in this building. You have not complained within earshot of staff. You have not contacted anyone from your previous life seeking rescue. This is noted. Secondary quest, passive. Unseen. Objective. Let no one in this hospital see weakness, not suppression, absence. True composure has no seams. Reward on completion, +5 authority trait enhancement, unreadable surface. The third appearance was simpler. Late on the last night, just before he slept, tomorrow you walk out. After that, everything begins. Be ready. He read it, set it aside, closed his eyes, he was ready. Discharge morning was gray and specific. Dr. Song signed the paperwork at 8 a.m. with the brisk efficiency of someone with 17 other patients. A nurse gave him a bag containing his clothes, laundered, he noticed, by the hospital service, and a sheet of aftercare instructions he read thoroughly and memorized on the spot. His cast was checked, his taped fingers were rechecked. He was handed a prescription for painkillers he planned to use only when not using them became a genuine operational problem. He dressed in the small bathroom off the ward. His clothes, the same ones he'd been wearing when the car hit him, washed clean now of whatever the car had left on them, fit the same as always. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. The face looked back at him. Same face, sharp bones, steady eyes, a bruise along the jaw fading from purple to yellow-green at the edges. A man who'd been hit by a car and broken and left in a room alone and had used the time to arrive at a decision. He looked at the face for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he put on his jacket, picked up his bag, and walked out. The hospital corridor was busy with mourning, trolleys, visitors arriving for other people, staff moving with that particular directional purpose of people who know exactly where they're going and why. Chen Wei moved through it without touching the walls. His ribs protested each step with a sharp, specific commentary. He received the commentary and continued walking. The arm in the cast was weight and awkwardness. He adjusted. The elevator, the ground floor, the automatic doors that opened onto the street. Outside air. Cool, smelling like a city morning. Exhaust and food stalls somewhere nearby, and the particular gray freshness of a sky that hadn't decided yet what kind of day it intended to be. He stood on the pavement outside the hospital entrance and felt the interface pulse. Brief, warm. The now familiar sensation of something updating somewhere just behind his vision. Quest complete. Stand +10 authority points awarded. Total authority 10 over 100. Trait unlocked, unbreakable, active, permanent. Trait unlocked, unreadable. Surface, active, permanent. Current status, beginning. Next quest loading. Ghost. Objective. Disappear completely from the radar of Liang Guowei's operation for 30 days. No contact with previous life, no patterns, no predictability. Reward, +15. Authority unlock, strategic thinking, enhanced pattern recognition in social and business environments. First money. Objective. Generate 50,000 yen through your own action within 60 days. No loans, no charity. Reward +20 authority. Unlock resource allocation, instinctive understanding of how money moves and where leverage lives. The city is large. You are currently nobody. These are both advantages. Use them. Chen Wei read it again. Looked up at the gray city morning. The city is large. You are currently nobody. These are both advantages. He stood on the pavement outside the hospital for exactly 30 seconds, long enough to let it settle. Not so long that it looked like hesitation. Then he picked a direction and walked. The Beigang district at 7 in the morning smelled like soy milk and diesel and the particular kind of ambition that doesn't have enough money yet to smell like anything else. Chen Wei walked it slowly on his first morning out of the hospital, not because his ribs demanded slowness. They did, but that wasn't the reason, but because he was mapping. 3 years of night patrols had given him a specific skill, the ability to read a neighborhood the way other people read faces, the flow of foot traffic, the placement of businesses, which stalls had lines and which didn't and why, where money moved and where it pooled and where it drained away. He'd used this skill to anticipate trouble. He was going to use it now for something else. The room above the hardware store was exactly as he'd left it. The landlord, Mrs. Fang, was sweeping the entrance when he arrived. She looked at the cast on his arm and the fading bruise on his jaw with the expression of a woman who had decided many years ago that other people's business was a country she didn't visit. "You're back," she said. "I'm back. Paid up through the end of the month." "I know. Thank you for holding it." She swept. He went upstairs. The room was small enough that the 2 steps from the door to the bed covered most of it. A window over the alley below, a table that wobbled on one leg, a hot plate, the bag of his remaining clothes in the corner where he'd left it. He sat on the bed and opened the interface. It came when he focused for it now, a mental motion like flexing a specific muscle, and reviewed the active quests. Active quests. Goshirinohai 1 of 30, remain invisible to Liang's network. Progress 0%. First money, day 1 of 60. Generate 50,000 yen independently, current 4,200 yen. Progress 8.4%. Authority 10 over 100. Recommendation, begin with what you have. You have a working body, partial, 3 years of reading people professionally and no reputation left to protect. The last one is more valuable than you currently understand. He read the last line twice. No reputation left to protect. He thought about what that meant practically. A man with a reputation, with a job title, a social circle, a public identity, moves carefully. He protects the architecture of how others see him. He makes decisions based partly on their cost to the image he's built. Chen Wei had none of that. There was no image. There was no architecture. He could go anywhere, try anything, Fail privately and completely, and it would land on nothing because there was nothing to land on. He'd spent 3 years being careful inside the structure of an institution that had thrown him out. He didn't need to be careful in that way anymore. He needed to be smart. He lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling, different ceiling than the hospital, same white, more cracks, and thought about money. 50,000 yen in 60 days. That was the number. He turned it over the way he used to turn over a scene at an arrest, looking for the angle, the entry point, the thing that was true that hadn't been said yet. He had 4,200 yen, a cast on his arm, no contacts he could safely reach. The ghost quest meant staying dark, no old colleagues, no one who might mention his name in the wrong conversation. He was starting from a cleared field. What did he have? He had 3 years of watching how people moved through the city at night. He had a working understanding of which businesses operated in legal gray areas and how they moved their money and what they needed that they couldn't get through official channels. He had the ability to stay calm in a room when things were going badly. He had the specific hard-edged clarity that arrives when you've been stripped of everything and found yourself still functional on the other side of it. He had, as the system had noted, no reputation left to protect. He started making a list. The first week was physical. His ribs set the pace whether he consulted them or not. He moved through the Baegang district methodically, learning it the way he'd learned every patrol sector, on foot, at different hours, from different directions. He talked to people, not about himself, about them, about the neighborhood, about what was needed and what was missing and where the friction was. People talk to men who listen well and ask good questions and don't seem to want anything specific. Chen Wei was very good at seeming to want nothing specific. He was cataloging. The district had 3 categories of businesses, he found. The ones that were doing well and knew it, the ones that were struggling and knew it, and the interesting category, the ones that were struggling and didn't fully understand why. This third category was where money lived if you knew how to find it. He found his first opportunity on day 9. A wholesale fabric supplier named Mr. Kwan operated out of a warehouse on the district's eastern edge. Chen Wei had noticed the warehouse on his second day. The loading patterns were wrong. Trucks arriving at inefficient times, workers doubling up on tasks that should have been split, inventory sitting in the wrong configuration relative to order frequency. 3 years of watching how things moved had given him an eye for flow, and Mr. Kwan's operation had a blockage he probably couldn't see from inside it. Chen Wei walked in on a Tuesday morning, arm in the cast, and asked to speak to the owner. The woman at the front desk, mid-20s, overworked, the expression of someone managing 3 jobs at once, looked at him with calibrated skepticism. About what? About the fact that your Tuesday morning loading is costing you approximately 4 hours of labor you're not capturing in your pricing. He said it the way he'd learned to say things that needed to land cleanly. No preamble, no softening, just the fact placed in the air between them. She looked at him for a moment, then picked up the phone. Mr. Kwan was a small man in his 60s with the hands of someone who'd moved things physically for decades before he could afford to pay others to move things for him. He looked at Chen Wei the way experienced businessmen look at young men who show up unannounced with ideas, skeptically but not dismissively. Skepticism meant he was still listening. Chen Wei spent 20 minutes walking him through what he'd observed. Not recommendations, observations. The specific inefficiency in the Tuesday loading rotation. The inventory placement that was adding an average of 40 minutes per large order fulfillment. The pricing structure that was absorbing costs it shouldn't have been absorbing. He drew it on a piece of paper from Mr. Kwan's desk, rough diagrams, clear logic. Mr. Kwan listened without interrupting. This was the sign of a good businessman. He knew that interrupting someone who might have something useful to say was a way of costing yourself money. When Chen Wei finished, Mr. Kwan looked at the diagram for a while. Then, "What do you want for this?" 30 days of consulting. I fix what I've identified. I find anything else that's fixable. I document it clearly so your team can maintain it. You pay me 8,000 yen on completion if your throughput improves by at least 15%. Mr. Kwan looked at the cast on his arm. "You broke your arm." "My arm doesn't do the thinking." A pause. Then something that was almost a smile. "Start Monday. Progress update. First money. Current, 4,200 yen. to projected 12,200 yen. Progress 24.4%. Observation. You used pattern recognition developed in a completely different context and applied it to a new problem. This is how it works. Skills don't belong to the job you learn them in, they belong to you. +3 authority, initiative. Total, 13 over 100. He worked at Kwan's warehouse every morning for 3 weeks. Cast and all, he directed, he problem-solved, he rebuilt the loading rotation on paper and supervised its implementation. His ribs stopped making speeches about every movement and settled into a lower-level commentary he could mostly ignore. The warehouse throughput by the end of week 2 was running 23% more efficiently than when he'd walked in. Mr. Kwan paid him 8,000 yen and unprompted added 2,000 yen more. "I don't like owing people more than I've paid them," he said, with the practical morality of a man who'd built something real. "You're worth more than we agreed." Chen Wei took the money, thanked him, and didn't tell him it was the most straightforwardly decent thing anyone had done for him in 2 months. He found 2 more similar operations over the following weeks. A cold storage logistics company with a routing problem. A small import broker who was losing money in customs clearance because his documentation process had a structural gap that Chen Wei identified in an afternoon. Both paid. Neither knew his real background. He was simply a man with a sharp eye for how things should move versus how they were actually moving. By day 42 of the first money quest, he had 41,700 yen. He was close. He needed one more move. It was the noodle shop that gave him Lin Jianming. Chen Wei ate there because it was cheap and consistent and close to the warehouse district. And consistency in cheap food was an underrated virtue when you were eating for function rather than pleasure. He went at the same time every day, 12:15, just before the lunch rush peaked, and sat at the same corner table because it had a clear sightline to the door, and the other tables and old habits died on their own schedule. He noticed Lin Jianming on the 3rd day. The man sat alone at the table nearest the window, which had the worst sightline and the most noise from the street, a choice that suggested either obliviousness or indifference to his surroundings, and nothing about Lin Jianming suggested obliviousness. He was somewhere in his early 40s, with the kind of face that had once been conventionally handsome and was now more interesting, sharper, more weathered, the architectural result of years of thinking about difficult things. He dressed in clothes that had been expensive once and were maintained carefully, which told you something about the distance between where he'd been and where he currently was. He read while he ate, not his phone, a physical newspaper which he folded with the precise crease patterns of someone who'd been doing it for decades, and he annotated it. Small, dense notes in the margins, in handwriting too small to read from across the room but clearly systematic. Chen Wei watched this for 3 days without doing anything about it. On the 4th day, a man came in and sat down across from Lin Jianming without asking. Young, well-dressed, the easy physicality of someone who spent money on the gym. He leaned forward and said something. Lin Jianming set down his chopsticks and looked at the man with an expression of such complete patient contempt that Chen Wei felt it from 8 feet away. The young man said something else, louder this time. Chen Wei caught the word deadline and the word final. Lin Jianming picked his chopsticks back up and resumed eating without speaking. The young man stared at the side of his face for 10 seconds, stood up and left. Lin Jianming made a small note in the margin of his newspaper. Chen Wei picked up his bowl and walked over. "I'm going to sit here," Chen Wei said. "You can tell me to leave." Lin Jianming looked up. The contempt had been replaced with something neutral and assessing, a measuring look, quick and thorough. "Why would you want to sit here?" "Because whatever that conversation was, it was more interesting than anything else in this room. And you're the only person in here reading a physical newspaper which suggests either you're very traditional or you don't want a digital record of what you're annotating." A pause. Lin looked at him, the cast, the jaw, the eyes. He seemed to be making a series of rapid calculations. "Sit," he said. "Don't talk for a minute." Chen Wei sat, didn't talk, ate. Lin finished his bowl, set his chopsticks down, folded the newspaper with its precise creases and placed it to the side. Then he looked at Chen Wei with the full attention of a man who, Chen Wei was beginning to understand, was almost never fully distracted. "You're not from Beijing," Lin said. "No." "You're new here. 4, maybe 5 weeks." About that. You're not hiding from a wife. No, but you're hiding from something. Chen Wei looked at him. Are you always this direct with people you've known for 90 seconds? Only when I'm fairly confident they're direct back. Lin tilted his head slightly. I'm Lin Jianming. I used to be a financial journalist for a very good publication for a long time, until I wrote something that certain people felt strongly should not have been written. He said this with the flat affect of someone who has arrived, through long processing, at a place that is not quite peace, but is at least not war. Now I sit in this restaurant and eat noodles and annotate newspapers for reasons that are currently between me and the newspapers. And you are? Chen Wei told him his name, nothing else. Lin nodded slowly. The cast is recent. The bruise is old. 3 weeks, maybe 4. You're not favoring it the way a person favors an accident injury. You're managing it. There's a difference. He paused. Someone put you in a hospital. A car. Driven by someone who meant to. Chen Wei said nothing. Also not your first physical altercation recently. Lin looked at his jaw. But the others you walked away from without hospital time, so the car was escalation. He folded his hands on the table. You don't have to tell me anything. But I've been sitting in this restaurant for 6 months watching people come and go, and you're the first one who's walked over to a stranger and sat down since I've been here. That's either confidence or desperation, and you don't look desperate. I'm looking for someone who understands how money moves at the level above where I'm currently operating, Chen Wei said, and who has reasons of their own to be interested in certain kinds of information. The restaurant noise moved around them. A table nearby argued cheerfully over a bill. Lin Jianming looked at Chen Wei for a long moment. Then he picked up his folded newspaper and placed it in the center of the table, open to the financial pages, with 3 columns of margin annotations visible. Tell me who put you in the hospital, he said, and I'll tell you what I know about them. Because the men who do that kind of thing to police officers who make inconvenient arrests. He watched Chen Wei's face carefully as he said this. Tend to have the kind of financial architecture that only looks solid from the outside. Chen Wei looked at the newspaper, at the annotations, at the man across the table. Liang Guowei, he said. Lin Jianming went very still for exactly 2 seconds. Then he exhaled through his nose, not surprise, more like the sound of a man whose long patience has been rewarded. I have been looking, Lin said quietly, for approximately 3 years for someone with direct provable contact with Liang Guowei's operation. He looked at Chen Wei with something new in his eyes. Not excitement, something older and more careful than that. And you walked into my restaurant. Your restaurant. I eat here every day. It's my restaurant. He picked up his tea. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out. I'll tell you when you've said something important. They talked for 2 hours. Chen Wei told it clean and in sequence, the way he'd been trained to brief, facts, timeline, what he'd observed, what he could prove, what was inference. Lin listened the way Chen Wei had noticed he listened, with the full attention of a man who understood that what people didn't say was often as important as what they said, and who was tracking both columns simultaneously. When Chen Wei finished, Lin was quiet for a while. The firearm, he said finally. Type 92, modified, in evidence, or it was. I don't know what happened to it after I was terminated. It went away, Lin said with certainty. Evidence in cases connected to Liang Guowei has a history of going away. He tapped the table once, thinking. What I know about Liang, his legitimate business interests are a holding structure for 5 other things that are not legitimate. He has 3 people inside the city's administrative apparatus who function as, not employees exactly, more like infrastructure. One of them is in commercial permitting, one is in financial oversight, he paused. One is significantly higher than that. High enough that I could never get the story published without confirmation I couldn't get without access I didn't have. And now? Lin looked at him. Now I have someone who was close enough to Liang to arrest him and find the gun and survive what came after. He said survive with specific emphasis. That's not nothing, Chen Wei. That's a thread. I'm not interested in journalism, Chen Wei said, or in legal cases. not as an end goal. Lin raised an eyebrow. What are you interested in? Chen Wei thought about how to say it. He found the simplest version. I'm interested in becoming powerful enough that none of these people can reach me. And then in making sure they understand clearly and publicly what they lost when they decided I didn't matter. Lin looked at him for a long moment. That, he said, is a better answer than I expected. He folded his hands. And it requires money first, before anything else. I know. How much do you have? Chen Wei told him. Lin nodded slowly. I know of a situation, he said carefully. A private negotiation between two parties who each have something the other needs, and neither is willing to make the first move because neither trusts the other's intentions. If someone independent, someone neither party has any history with, could broker the conversation and structure the agreement, there's a fee in it, significant one. He paused. It's not entirely without risk. Tell me about the risk. One party is connected to Liang's network, peripherally, business relationship, not loyalty. If he saw your face and recognized you, he won't recognize me. Lin studied him. You're confident about that. 3 weeks ago, I walked past two of Liang's men on Jianhe Avenue. Chen Wei said it flatly. They were looking for a broke, beaten ex-cop. I was wearing a decent jacket and walking straight. They looked through me. He paused. People see what they expect to see. I've stopped looking like what they expect. Lin considered this. Then slowly he smiled, a small, precise smile that rearranged his face into something younger and sharper. All right, he said. I'll make an introduction, but listen to everything and say only what's necessary. These people decide trust based on what you don't say as much as what you do. I know, Chen Wei said. I've been doing this since I was 25. You were doing it as a police officer. The skill is the same. The uniform was the costume. Lin looked at him for a moment. Then he picked up his tea, found it cold, and signaled for fresh cups with the ease of a man who had decided something and was already moving past the decision into its execution. Finish your noodles, he said. We have things to plan. The negotiation took 4 days. Lin arranged the meeting, a private dining room at a restaurant in the Hongqiao district, neutral ground, the kind of place where expensive problems got solved over expensive food. The two parties were a mid-sized property developer named Mr. Su and a material supplier named Mr. Bei, locked in a contractual dispute that had stopped a 40 million yen development project for 11 weeks. Because neither man's lawyer could get the other man's lawyer to return a call without it becoming a territorial exercise. Chen Wei sat between them and did what he'd spent 3 years doing in a different context. He read them. What they actually needed versus what they were saying they needed. Where the real fear was versus where the stated grievance was. How to give each man a version of the outcome that felt like winning, because the deal that works is never the one where someone loses. It's the one where everyone can tell a story afterward in which they came out ahead. By the end of day 2, he understood the actual shape of the problem. By day 3, he'd structured a resolution. On day 4, he put it in front of both men simultaneously, walked them through it clause by clause, and watched them agree with the relieved efficiency of two people who had needed someone to hand them the door they'd been standing next to. The broker's fee was 18,000 yen, split between both parties. He walked out of the restaurant into cool evening air and felt the interface update before he'd reached the corner. Quest complete. First money. Final total, 61,700 yen. Objective, 50,000 yen checkmark, plus 20 authority points. Awarded total authority, 33 over 100. Trait unlocked. Resource allocation. You understand instinctively how money moves, where the pressure points are, where leverage lives before others see it. This will compound. Trait unlocked. Strategic reading. Enhanced pattern recognition in social and business environments. You see 3 moves ahead in human interaction. Act accordingly. New quest loading. The image. He called Lin from the street corner. It's done, he said. Both parties signed? Both parties signed and shook hands, and one of them offered me a standing referral. He paused. Lin, I need to ask you something. Ask. Officer Deng Shuo, from my old precinct. He's moonlighting somewhere. I need to know where. A brief silence. Why? Chen Wei thought about the moment in the patrol car. Deng Shuo staring at his phone. Let it go, Wei. The careful non-looking in the corridor when Chen Wei walked out with his cardboard box, the signed termination paperwork. Because the system just gave me a new quest, he said, and I think Deng Shuo is the tutorial. He found out on a Tuesday, Lin had contacts everywhere. The residue of a decade of investigative journalism, people who owed him information in various denominations. Deng Shuo was moonlighting as a senior bouncer at Club Meridian, a mid-tier nightclub in the Xinhua Entertainment District, working Thursday through Saturday 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. The club had a minor reputation for looking away from certain activities in exchange for certain arrangements with certain people, the kind of arrangement that required a police contact to manage, which explained Deng Shuo's value there. It also explained, Lin noted with the calm interest of a man updating a file, why Deng Shuo had accessed 3 arrest records he had no assigned reason to access over the past 6 months, and why those records correlated neatly with individuals who had subsequently found their cases quietly complicated. Chen Wei listened to all of this and felt something cold and clarifying move through him. Not anger, not the hot kind, the functional kind, the kind that sharpens edges rather than blurring them. Can you write it? He asked. I can write it, Lin said. I've been writing it for 2 months, waiting for one more piece. You just gave me 3. He paused. This publishes. Deng Shuo loses the moonlighting income and the protection it buys. His precinct position becomes untenable. He's removed from the cases he's been managing. That's sufficient, Chen Wei said. You don't want more? More than losing everything he's built his side income on? Chen Wei looked out the window of his room at the alley below. No, that's proportionate. He was a small part of a larger machinery. He gets small consequences. He paused. The larger parts get larger consequences, later. Lin was quiet for a moment. You think about this like a sequence, don't you? I think about it like a story, which is almost the same thing but with better pacing. He paused. I'll file it Thursday. His editor is a contact. It runs Friday. Chen Wei did not go to Club Meridian on Friday night. He didn't need to see it happen. He was 3 districts away in the small room above the hardware store, sitting at the wobbling table with his laptop open, bought secondhand the previous week, functional, working on the next problem. Lin sent him a message at 11:47 p.m., published 20 minutes ago, already circulating. And then 4 minutes later, he's been asked to leave the premises. The club is distancing, fast. Chen Wei read both messages, set the phone down, looked at the wall. He didn't feel what he'd expected to feel. Not satisfaction exactly, something quieter than that. The feeling of a mechanism working the way it was designed to work, of a calibration confirmed. He had put a specific kind of pressure in a specific place and the outcome had been proportionate and clean. He was learning how this worked. He was learning that power was not what he thought it was when he was in uniform. Not force, not authority granted by an institution that could revoke it before lunchtime. It was this, the ability to move pieces in an order that produced a result, to understand what each piece was worth and what it cost to move it and where it needed to go, to be patient enough to wait for the right moment and decisive enough to act cleanly when it came. He had 61,700 yen. He had Lin Jianming. He had 33 points of something called authority, which felt less like a game score every day and more like a genuine measure of something he was building inside himself, a quality of presence and clarity and certainty that he could feel accumulating the way you feel the temperature in a room change, gradually and then all at once. The interface pulsed softly. Quest complete. First face slap. Target, Deng Shuo. Method, exposure, clean proportionate. Public consequence, confirmed your hands, clean +5 authority. Total, 38/100. Note, you did not go to watch. This is correct. The powerful do not watch consequences. They create them and move to the next thing. Continue. Ghost. Day 28 of 30. 2 days remaining. You have not been found. You have not been predictable. Stay the course. New quest loading. The image. Objective, be seen correctly. In 3 elite social environments within 30 days, the city has rooms you haven't entered yet. It's time to enter them. Preparation required. He read it, closed the interface, looked at the wobbling table, the hot plate, the window showing the alley in the dark. Then he opened his laptop, found a tailor in the Jing'an district with solid reviews and reasonable prices for made-to-measure, and booked an appointment for Monday morning. The rooms were waiting. He would enter them correctly or not at all. The tailor's name was Mr. Cheng, and he had the unhurried precision of a man who understood that his work outlasted the occasions it was made for. His shop occupied the ground floor of a narrow building on Wudding Road. No sign outside, just a brass number plate and a door with a particular quality of stillness that communicated to the right people that something serious happened inside. Chen Wei had found him through Lin, who had spent a decade attending enough high-end events to develop opinions about which tailors in the city actually understood the difference between a suit that fit and a suit that worked. There's a distinction, Lin had said over noodles the previous morning. A suit that fits sits correctly on the body. A suit that works makes people adjust their assumptions about you before you've said a word. You want the second kind. Chen Wei walked into Mr. Cheng's shop at 10 on a Monday morning with 61,700 yen in an account he'd opened under a cousin's name, a precaution the Ghost Quest had made obvious, and the specific intention of spending a portion of it on something that would return multiples. Mr. Cheng looked at him for about 4 seconds without speaking, not rudely, the way a craftsman looks at material he's assessing before he begins. "What do you need it to do?" he asked. Chen Wei thought about how to answer that. "I need to walk into rooms where I don't belong yet," he said, "and have people assume I do." Mr. Chung nodded once, slowly, as if this were a perfectly ordinary brief. "Sit down," he said. "We'll start with measurements." He spent 12,000 yen. It was the most he'd spent on anything that wasn't survival, and he made the decision without hesitation and without guilt, which itself felt like new information about who he was becoming. The system had been explicit. This was an investment with a calculable return. The 12,000 yen would go into rooms that would return far more than 12,000 yen. The only question was how quickly and through what sequence of events. Mr. Chung delivered 2 suits, 4 shirts, and a selection of accessories with the same unhurried precision he'd applied to the measurements. One suit was charcoal, almost black, with a subtle structure that sat perfectly on Chen Wei's shoulders. The other was a deep navy that worked for both business and social environments. Both were cut with the particular economy of someone who understood that simplicity, executed correctly, communicated more than ornamentation. Chen Wei tried them on in the small fitting room at the back of the shop and looked at himself in the mirror for a long, quiet moment. The face was the same. The eyes were the same. But the shape of the man in the mirror, the way he occupied space, the line from shoulder to heel, was different in a way that went beyond fabric. Mr. Chung had cut the suit to Chen Wei's current body, the breadth of shoulders developed through 3 years of physical work and sharpened further by 2 months of deliberate recovery training. The cast was off now, removed the previous week, the arm stiff but functional, the physiotherapy. Something he was doing himself in the room above the hardware store every morning with the same methodical attention he'd been applying to everything else. He looked like someone who had decided something and was dressed for the consequences of that decision. Good, he thought. That's exactly right. Quest activated. The image. Objective. Be seen are correctly in 3 elite social environments within 30 days. Criteria for correctly. You are remembered after you leave. At least one person of significant social capital initiates contact with you, not the reverse. You leave each room having acquired something, information, a contact, or a reputation fragment. The goal is not to impress. The goal is to become familiar. Familiarity precedes trust. Trust precedes power. Reward, plus 12 authority. Unlock. First circle. Access to Tier 1 social network. Invitations begin arriving that you did not request. Lin got him into the first room. It was a private art preview at a gallery in the French concession, the kind of event where the art was secondary to the attendance list, and everyone understood this and nobody said it. 40 people in a space designed for 30, all of them various configurations of money and influence and the social ambition that lives between the two. Lin attended these things occasionally as a ghost from his previous life. People remembered his byline even if his current situation was unclear, and in certain circles remembered bylines open doors that current employment status didn't. Chen Wei stood in the gallery with a glass of wine he didn't drink and watched the room the way he'd watched the Begang district on his first morning out of the hospital, mapping. Who deferred to whom? Which conversations had genuine interest in them and which were social maintenance? Who came in alone and who needed to arrive with someone, where the actual decisions were being made versus where the performance of making decisions was happening? He talked to 4 people, not more. He'd decided in advance. 4 conversations, each one genuinely interested. No card exchanges he didn't mean, nothing performed. If he was going to become someone these rooms recognized, it had to be real or it wouldn't hold. The first conversation was with a woman in her 60s who turned out to run one of the city's larger import consulting firms and who was standing alone near a sculpture that she was looking at with genuine attention rather than social display. Chen Wei looked at the sculpture too. It was a bronze piece, a figure caught in mid-motion, incomplete on purpose, the missing parts of it as deliberate as the present parts. "It's about what's not finished," the woman said, without looking at him. The way people talk about art when they forget they're supposed to be performing their response to it. "Or what was finished and then deliberately removed," Chen Wei said. "The base has tool marks. Those aren't casting artifacts." She looked at him then, sharp, assessing. "You know sculpture?" "I know that makers usually leave evidence of their decisions if you look at the right places." She looked back at the sculpture. "Wenhua," she said. Her name offered without preamble. Chen Wei. They talked for 12 minutes. She told him 3 things that were genuinely interesting about the city's current import climate. He told her 1 thing about operational efficiency that he'd learned at Mr. Kwan's warehouse that turned out to apply directly to a problem she was having with her fulfillment chain. She looked at him afterward with the expression of someone recalibrating an initial assessment. "What do you do, Mr. Chen?" she asked. "Currently, I identify where things aren't moving the way they should and I fix it." "For whom?" "Whoever has the problem." He paused. "And the intelligence to recognize it as one." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she took a card from her clutch and held it out. "I may have a problem," she said. "That qualifies on both counts." He took the card, did not give one back. He didn't have one yet, and he wasn't going to apologize for it. "I'll be in touch," he said, and moved to the next conversation. The second room was harder to get into and more important. It was a private dinner at a members club in Jing'an, the kind of place that didn't have a website and whose name appeared in certain conversations with a weight that suggested it meant something to the people saying it. Lin's contact was a man named Mr. Bao, not to be confused with Iron Tong, just an unfortunate sharing of the most common surname in the city. A semi-retired architect who still sat on 3 boards and attended this dinner monthly because the conversation was better than most alternatives. Lin called in a favor to get Chen Wei a seat. He was specific about it afterward. "This is the only one of these I can do. After this, you need to be getting in on your own." Chen Wei understood. He treated the dinner accordingly, not as a social event, but as an exam. 14 people around a table, the kind of dinner where the conversation moved fast and ranged widely, and the unspoken selection criterion was whether you could keep up across multiple domains without performing your keeping up. He kept up. He said less than anyone else at the table and was more listened to when he spoke, which was a dynamic he'd noticed in certain kinds of rooms and filed away at 25 and never forgotten. He knew something about shipping logistics that turned out to be relevant to a conversation about supply chain restructuring. He knew something about urban planning patterns from 3 years of walking every district in the city at night. He asked a question about private equity that he'd prepared in advance based on Lin's briefings and which landed in the conversation in a way that moved it forward rather than sideways, which is what good questions do. By the time the dinner ended, he had spoken at length with 2 people who had initiated the conversation rather than responded to his. One of them was a woman named Madame Shen. Madame Shen was somewhere in her mid-50s and had the composed, deliberate quality of a person who had spent decades making decisions about who was worth her time and had gotten very good at making them quickly. She ran, or rather shaped, which was a different and more interesting thing, the city's major charitable and social event architecture, not as an organizer. As the person who decided which events mattered and which didn't, which attendees would be invited to the right rooms and which would spend their careers in the anteroom wondering why their RSVPs were always acknowledged and their invitations were always slightly off-center. She sat next to Chen Wei at dinner by arrangement. He learned later that she'd requested the seating, which meant she'd asked about him before they sat down, which meant someone at the table had said something worth asking about. She was interested in him the way a person is interested in a lock they haven't seen before. Not warmly, or not only warmly, analytically. "You came with Mr. Bao's introduction," she said, during a gap in the larger conversation. "Indirectly." "Who introduced you to Mr. Bao?" "A journalist I respect." He didn't give Lin's name. Not because he was hiding it, Lin was not a secret, but because he wanted to see if she'd push and what that would tell him. She didn't push. She noted the non-answer with a slight incline of her head that communicated she'd registered it and moved on. "What do you do with your time, Mr. Chen?" "I'm building something," he said. "At the moment, it doesn't have a name yet. When it has a name, I'll be happy to tell you what it is." "Most people in this room would have given me a title," she said. "Most people in this room built their titles before they built the thing the title describes." He said it without edge, as a simple observation. "I'm doing it the other order." Madame Shen looked at him for a long moment. Around them, the dinner conversation flowed on. Then she picked up her wine glass and said very quietly, almost to herself, "That's either very confident or very foolish." "Possibly both," Chen Wei said. "The proportion shifts depending on the week." She laughed. A real one, not a social laugh, a surprised one. She recovered quickly, but he'd seen it. By the end of the evening, she had given him her personal contact information and said, with the particular precision of a woman who chose her words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, "I host a small gathering the first Saturday of every month. Private, 40 people, the kind of conversation you'd find interesting. Consider yourself invited." He found the third room himself. It was a rooftop event at a hotel in the Bund district, less exclusive than Madame Shen's dinner, more accessible, the kind of gathering that functioned as a social mixing mechanism for the city's upper middle tier of ambition. He didn't need Lin's help to get in. He bought a ticket, 800 yen, which he paid without calculation, and arrived at 9 in the evening looking like someone who attended these things regularly. He stayed 2 hours. He had 3 conversations. One of them was with a man named Director Kai. He introduced himself simply as Kai, but the way 3 separate people adjusted their posture when he entered the rooftop told Chen Wei everything about the weight of the name before he looked him up later that night. Director Kai was in his late 60s, semi-retired from a media empire he'd built over 40 years, and now nominally stepped back from in the way that people with real power step back, which is to say, not very far, and in a direction where they could still see everything. He was at the rooftop event because his granddaughter's friend had organized it, and he was the kind of man who showed up for things connected to family, even when the thing itself was beneath his usual altitude. He was standing alone near the railing looking at the river and the lights on the other bank when Chen Wei positioned himself 3 feet away, also looking at the river. "The light pollution is worse than it was 10 years ago," Director Kai said to no one in particular. "The development density on the Pudong side tripled between 2012 and 2019, Chen Wei said. "More towers, more light. The skyline's more impressive. The view of it from this side is worse." Kai glanced at him. "That's an interesting way to frame development." "It's accurate. Most improvements are improvements and costs simultaneously. The question is always who's absorbing which part." Kai turned to look at him directly for the first time. He had the eyes of someone who had spent 40 years in media, alert, measuring, the professional habit of assessing whether what he was hearing was worth his attention. "Kai," he said, "Chen Wei." They talked for 40 minutes. About the city, about investment cycles, about a particular media consolidation trend that Kai had opinions on and Chen Wei had, through Lin's extensive briefings, enough knowledge to engage with substantively. Kai asked him twice what he did. Chen Wei gave him the same answer he'd given Madame Shen. He was building something that didn't have a name yet. Kai found this more interesting than a name would have been. Chen Wei had calculated that he would. When Chen Wei left the rooftop at 11, Kai had given him a direct line and said, "Call me when it has a name. I'm curious about what it turns out to be." Quest complete. The image. Environments entered. 3 check initiated contact. Received. 4 check. Memory created. Confirmed check. Acquisitions. 3 contacts, 2 invitations, 1 direct line to Tier 1 check. Plus 12 authority. Total 50 over 100. Milestone reached. 50 authority. Trait unlocked. Magnetism. Your presence creates gravity. People are drawn to you before they understand why. They stay because they find reasons after. This is not charm. Charm is performed. This is permanent. Major unlock. Sphere of influence. You have reached the threshold where individual action compounds into network effect. The next phase requires you to bind 3 powerful figures to your orbit, not through obligation, not through debt, through value, given freely, received permanently. Quest activated. C. Sphere of influence. Target 1. A figure with resource access, capital, logistics, reach. Target 2. A figure with social gatekeeping power, access to rooms. Target 3. A figure with information or media amplification capacity. Method. Deliver genuine value to each. Let loyalty form naturally. Do not rush it. Rushed loyalty breaks. Reward plus 20 authority. Unlock Inner Circle. You become a node that others root through. People with power begin connecting to you because you have become connective tissue in the network. He read it on the taxi ride home. 3 targets. The system had given him parameters but not names. It never specified, he was learning. It gave him the shape of what was needed and left the identification to him, which meant it trusted him to read the landscape correctly, or it was testing whether he could. He already knew the names. Mr. Fang, a shipping magnate he'd heard about through Madame Shen at dinner, mentioned in passing with a particular combination of respect and frustration that suggested a man who was powerful and currently dealing with a problem nobody had solved. Resource access, capital, reach. Madame Shen herself, she was already opening doors. But he hadn't given her anything yet, which meant the relationship was still asymmetrical. He needed to deliver something real to her, something that made his presence in her network valuable rather than just interesting. Director Kai, information, media, amplification. The man had 40 years of knowing where things were and how to make sure the right people knew about them. 3 people. 3 genuine deliveries of value. He looked out the taxi window at the city going past, the lights, the movement, the enormous anonymous complexity of 10 million people living their lives in proximity to each other, and felt something that was not quite happiness but was in the same neighborhood. He was not hiding anymore, he was building. The approach to Mr. Fang took 11 days of preparation. Through Madame Shen's casual mention, Lin's research, and 2 evenings of careful reading, Chen Wei built a picture. Mr. Fang ran the largest privately held cold chain logistics operation in the eastern region. Ships, warehouses, last-mile infrastructure for temperature-sensitive cargo. The business was operationally excellent. But it had one persistent vulnerability, a customs clearance bottleneck at the Yangshan deep-water port that was costing him approximately 3 million yen per quarter in delayed cargo fees and client penalties. 3 previous consulting firms had looked at it. None had solved it. Chen Wei understood why after 4 hours with the publicly available documentation. The consultants had approached it as a logistics problem. It wasn't. It was a relationship problem wearing logistics clothing. The bottleneck existed because of a personnel change at the Port Authority 2 years ago, a new inspection supervisor with a different working style from his predecessor, and nobody in Fang's operation had invested the time in understanding what the new supervisor actually needed to do his job smoothly. The solution wasn't process redesign. It was one conversation conducted correctly. Chen Wei wrote a 6-page analysis, clean, specific, no filler. He sent it to Mr. Fang's office through Madame Shen's introduction with a cover note that said, "I believe I understand the actual structure of your Yangshan problem. If you'd like to discuss it, I'm available." No CV, no credentials, just the document. Mr. Fang called within 48 hours. The meeting was in Fang's office on the 28th floor of a building that cost more per floor than Chen Wei's entire previous life. Mr. Fang was a compact, precise man in his late 60s with the working hands of someone who'd started in the physical end of logistics before building up to its financial end, and the sharp eyes of someone who had not forgotten what the physical end taught him. He had Chen Wei's document on his desk. He'd read it. Chen Wei could tell by the way it was positioned and the one pencil mark visible in the margin. "You identified the supervisor," Fang said without preamble. "Inspector Liu Mingzhu, transferred from Tianjin Port Authority. His previous operation ran a pre-clearance documentation standard that Yangshan doesn't formally require but that he clearly prefers. Your team's documentation meets the technical minimum. It doesn't meet what Liu Mingzhu needs to process quickly. And you know this how? I read his approval rate by cargo category and cross-referenced it with which operators had the fastest clearance times. The fast ones all submit documentation that's more detailed than required in two specific areas. That's not coincidence. That's someone's working preference becoming a de facto standard." Fang looked at the document, at Chen Wei, back at the document. "My third consulting firm told me the problem was systemic port authority underfunding," he said. "That's also true. It's just not the part you can solve from your side." A pause. Something in Fang's face shifted. The specific movement of a man who has been handed a key that fits. "What do you want for this?" he asked. Chen Wei had thought carefully about this answer. "Nothing immediate," he said. "I'm building something. When it's built, I'd like the option of a conversation about whether there's a way to work together. No obligation on your side. If the answer is no, it's no. I'm not trading. I'm investing." Mr. Fang was quiet for a long moment. He looked at Chen Wei with the full, unfiltered attention of a man who had learned to read people the hard way and trusted what he read. "Why?" he said simply. "Because I want to be in rooms with people who've built real things," Chen Wei said. "And the fastest way to get into those rooms is to be useful before you need anything." Fang put his hands flat on the desk. Not the chief superintendent's gesture. Different energy entirely. This was a man putting his hands down in order to make a decision, not to signal an ending. "Come back next week," he said. "I want you to meet my operations director. We'll implement your approach and I want you in the room when we do." He stood up and extended his hand. Chen Wei shook it. "How old are you?" Fang asked, holding the handshake a moment longer. 28. Fang looked at him steadily. "I started with one refrigerated truck and a lease I couldn't afford," he said. "I know the look of a man who's decided something about himself." He released the handshake. "Don't waste it." Madame Shen was different. He didn't bring her a document or a solution. He brought her something she hadn't asked for and couldn't have known she needed. Information about a situation she was adjacent to that was about to become significantly more complicated. Through Lin's network of former journalism contacts, Chen Wei had learned that a major charity gala Madame Shen was closely associated with, one she'd spent 6 months building toward, was about to be publicly connected to a sponsorship source that was under regulatory investigation. Not her fault, not her knowledge, not her doing. But the connection would exist, and when it surfaced, it would be ugly. And the timing, 2 weeks before the event, would be designed to maximize damage. He called her directly. Told her what he'd learned, where it came from, what the timeline was, and what he thought she could do about it in the available window. She was silent on the phone for almost a full minute. "How did you get this?" she asked. "It's not important how I got it. What matters is that you have time to act if you move this week." Another pause. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you invited me into your room without knowing anything about me except that I seemed worth the risk. I don't forget that kind of thing." He paused. "And because I want to be the kind of person who tells people things like this when I know them. That's its own kind of currency." Madame Shen moved with the decisive efficiency of a woman who had not reached her position by being slow with important information. The sponsorship was replaced within 5 days. The gala went forward without the complication. Nobody who attended knew how close it had come to something very different. Madame Shen sent him a handwritten note afterward, 4 lines. The last line said, "I don't know yet what you're building, Mr. Chen, but I intend to be watching." Director Kai was the most straightforward. Chen Wei called him, as instructed, when he had a name for what he was building. He'd spent 3 days working on this with Lynn, what to call it, how to position it, what it actually was at its core. What it was, stripped to its simplest form, was this: a consultancy that identified and resolved the specific kind of structural inefficiency that conventional firms missed because they approach problems from the inside of existing frameworks. Chen Wei approached them from outside all frameworks, which was currently his greatest operational advantage. The name they landed on was simple. Wei Consulting was too plain. Strategic Flow was too generic. What they settled on was Qingming Advisory, Qingming meaning clear and bright, chosen because clarity was the actual product. He explained this to Director Kai over coffee in a private room at a club Kai used for these conversations. Kai listened with the professional attention of a man who had spent 40 years deciding what was worth his platform and what wasn't. When Chen Wei finished, Kai was quiet for a moment. "You want coverage," Kai said. "Not coverage, credibility. There's a difference. Coverage is noise, credibility is signal." Chen Wei leaned forward slightly. "I don't need articles about me. I need the right people to have heard the name in the right context. You know how that works better than anyone." "I'm retired," Kai said. "You have lunch every week with 4 editors who still call you before they make major decisions," Chen Wei said. "I know because 2 of them mentioned it at events in the last 3 weeks without realizing I was paying attention." Kai looked at him. Something in the older man's expression moved, a kind of recognition, the look of a person who sees a quality in someone else that they remember from their own early years. "What do I get?" Kai asked. "An early position in something that's going to matter. I'm not selling you a steak. I'm offering you the thing that money can't buy after a certain point, a reason to be interested in something new." He paused. "You told me on the rooftop that you were curious about what I was building. I'm telling you what it is. That's what you get right now." Kai was quiet for a long time. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "I'll make 3 calls," he said finally. Not as Director Kai, as an old man who tells people whose time he respects when he thinks something is worth knowing about. "That's all I can do." "That's all I need," Chen Wei said. "Quest complete. Sphere of influence. Mr. Fang, bound checkmark, resource access. Madam Shen, bound checkmark, social architecture. Director Kai, bound checkmark, information/media. Method, genuine value, freely given checkmark. Loyalty type, earned not purchased. Checkmark +20. Authority total, 70/100. Unlock, inner circle. You are now connective tissue. People route through you. Invitations arrive unrequested. Rooms open before you knock. Observation. 3 months ago, you had 4,200 yen and a hospital ceiling. You now have 61,700 yen liquid. 3 Tier 1 relationships. 1 operational business. A name in rooms you haven't entered yet. This is not success. This is the infrastructure of success. Do not confuse the two. Next quest loading. The business moved quickly once Kai's calls landed. In the first 2 weeks after Qingming Advisory had a name and a quiet word attached to it in the right conversations, 3 inquiries arrived through Madame Shen's network. 2 were manageable problems that Chen Wei solved in days and billed cleanly. The third was a complex restructuring problem at a mid-sized investment firm. A month of work, intensive, and Chen Wei brought Lin in as a research partner, splitting the fee honestly. The fee was 180,000 yen. He sat with that number for a while, not celebrating, he wasn't at that stage yet, but noting it, marking the distance between the man who'd had 4,200 yen 3 months ago and the man looking at this number now. The distance was real. The distance was made of specific decisions, specific mornings, specific conversations conducted without flinching. He moved out of the room above the hardware store. He didn't do it dramatically. He paid Mrs. Fang for the rest of the month, thanked her for the silence, and moved to a service department in the Zuhui district. Clean, modern, anonymous, in the right way. Not a penthouse, not yet. But a place where the ceiling didn't have cracks and the table didn't wobble, and a man could sit and think without the alley sounds below reminding him of exactly where he was. He stood at the window of the new apartment on the first night and looked at the city and felt the distance again. Infrastructure, the system had said, not success. Infrastructure. He understood the distinction. He was not where he was going. He was building the road. He met Yue Ning on a Tuesday evening at a site he had no business being at. There was a neighborhood in the old Shikumen district where a developer had filed permits to demolish a block of early 20th century lane houses, the kind of dense, intimate residential architecture that the city had been systematically removing for 30 years in favor of towers that were taller and more profitable, and contained nothing of what the lanes had contained. Chen Wei had no professional stake in it. He'd read about it in a newsletter Lin subscribed to and found himself going there on a Tuesday evening because he'd spent enough nights walking this city to know what was being lost and to have feelings about it that didn't require justification. He stood on the edge of the lane looking at the buildings, the worn stone lintels, the lines of laundry still strung between windows, even though the residents were mostly gone, the way the light came through at the lane's angle in a way it wouldn't come through anywhere else, and thought about what would be there in 2 years. Glass and steel and identical apartments and the particular absence that towers have of human scale, of the sense that people had lived here for a long time, and their living had left marks. He heard a shutter click. He turned. A woman stood 20 feet down the lane, camera raised. A proper camera, not a phone. A medium-format film camera that was either vintage or a very deliberate choice. She was photographing the windows, the light on the stone, the laundry, the gap in the wall where someone had planted a small, tenacious plant that had decided the crack in the masonry was sufficient soil. She was somewhere in her late 20s, dressed practically, dark pants, a jacket that had been worn rather than worn for appearance, hair pulled back with the economy of someone who'd done it in 30 seconds, on the way out the door because she had other things to think about. She hadn't noticed Chen Wei yet. She was fully occupied with what she was looking at. He watched her work for a moment. She moved through the lane with the focused, patient attention of someone who understood that the thing worth photographing was never the obvious thing. It was the thing adjacent to the obvious thing, the angle that contained what the straight shot missed. Then she turned and saw him, and her expression did something interesting. Not startlement, more like mild recalibration. She lowered the camera slightly. "You're not a developer," she said. It wasn't a question. "What makes you say that?" "Developers look at buildings like they're already gone. You were looking at it like it's still here." He considered that. "Yuening," she added, since they were apparently past introductions being required. "Chen Wei." She looked at him for a moment with the same quality of attention she'd given the windows. "You know what this place is. Shikumen construction, probably 1920s. The lintels are European-influenced, but the layout is Jiangnan Courtyard. It's a hybrid, built at the intersection of two things." He paused. "There aren't many left." She looked at him again, longer this time. "Are you an architect?" "No." "You speak like one." "I walk a lot," he said. "At night, mostly. When you walk a city at night for long enough, you start to understand its grammar." She lowered the camera fully. "I'm documenting this block before it comes down. The developer filed demolition permits last month. They start in 6 weeks." She said this with the flat, factual tone of someone who is angry about something and has decided that anger was less useful than documentation. "What do you do with the documentation?" "I don't know yet. I've been doing it for 3 years. Buildings that are about to disappear. I have 12,000 photographs of things that don't exist anymore." She paused. "Sometimes I think I'm just making an archive of losses." "Or you're making proof that they existed," Chen Wei said. "That's different from just documenting loss." She looked at him for a long moment. The light in the lane was shifting. The specific gold of early evening in a narrow space, the kind that didn't last. "I'm going to keep shooting," she said. "But if you're not in a hurry, you can walk with me. I'm better at this when there's someone to talk to." He was not in a hurry. He walked with her. They spent 2 hours in the lane and the surrounding blocks. She talked about architecture and light and the specific quality of spaces that had been shaped by actual human use over time, rather than designed for it from above. He talked about the city's grammar, the logic of how districts related to each other, how traffic and commerce and residential density had a structure you could read once you knew the language. She pushed back on several things he said and was right about two of them, which he acknowledged without performance, because she was right and that was the relevant fact. She asked him what he did. He told her about Qingming Advisory, the simple version, clean, without making it larger than it was. Consulting, she said, with the mild skepticism of a creative person hearing the word. Specifically, finding the thing that's wrong that everyone else has decided is fixed or unfixable, and fixing it. Applied to buildings? Currently applied to businesses, but the skill is the same. He looked at a doorway she'd just photographed, the peeling paint, the worn stone threshold, the century of people who'd crossed it. You look at buildings and you see what's been missed in the official version. That's the same skill. She considered this. That's a generous comparison. It's an accurate one. She looked at him sidelong, a quick evaluating glance that reminded him of the way certain people in certain rooms looked at him. Whatever she decided, she didn't share immediately. She raised the camera and shot the last of the evening light on the top story of the end building, where the stone had gone amber in the specific way that only happens for about 6 minutes around this hour. I have a show, she said as she lowered the camera. Unofficial, a friend's space in Jing'an 3 weeks from now. First time I've shown any of these. She paused. If you're interested. I'm interested, he said. She nodded once, with the economy of a person who says what they mean and doesn't embellish it. They walked back to the lane's entrance where the city opened up again. The noise, the lights, the scale that made the lane seem like a different country. She wrote the address of the show on a card from her jacket pocket and gave it to him. On the back of the card was her phone number, added in a different pen, which meant it was added now rather than printed, which meant something. He thanked her. She nodded again. She turned and walked back toward the lane. He stood on the pavement and watched her go and felt something that was not strategy and not calculation and not the cold, precise machinery he'd been running for 3 months. Something warmer than that. Something he hadn't expected. He put the card in his jacket pocket and walked back to the main road. That night in the apartment in Shuhui, he sat at the window with the city below and opened the interface. Status report, day 91. Authority 70 over 100 liquid capital, 243,000 yen active business, Qingming Advisory Network. Tier Level 1 access confirmed. Ally status Lin Jianming active. Mr. Fang bound. Madam Shen bound. Director Kai bound. Yue Ning new unclassified. Note on Yue Ning. Some things are not quests, some things are just true. Threat status, Liang Guowei, active. Iron Tong, last confirmed location, Pudong District. Pattern, irregular, you have not been identified, maintain. Hainai, next phase. Approaching. The rooms you need are larger now. Madam Shen's annual gala, 23 days. Liang Guowei will be there. Zhou Fengshan will be there. Zhou Hao will be there. You will be there. New quest loading. Thuristopian theme. He read it twice. 23 days. He looked at the city, the lights, the movement, the enormous machine of it turning over in the dark, and thought about a man in a Bentley laughing on a pavement, about a chief superintendent's hands flat on a desk, about a silver BMW accelerating with intent, about white chrysanthemums scattered across wet asphalt. 23 days. He was not ready yet. He would be. He closed the interface and sat in the quiet of the apartment and began planning. The invitation arrived 11 days before the gala. Not through Madame Shen's office, through her personal assistant, which was a different thing entirely and communicated accordingly. A cream envelope, heavy stock, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people's lunch. The text inside was brief and precise. Madam Shen requests the pleasure of your company. Dress, black tie. Arrival, 8 p.m. Kindly confirmed by Thursday. Chen Wei confirmed by Wednesday. He spent the 11 days preparing with the same methodical attention he'd given every other problem in the past 3 months, except this one was different in a way that required a different kind of preparation. The previous work had been about building infrastructure, money, network, name. This was about deployment, about walking into a room containing the specific people who had decided he didn't exist and existing in a way they couldn't process. He did not think about revenge during these 11 days. He thought about calibration, about precision, about the difference between a man who walks into a room wanting something from the people in it and a man who walks in having already determined that what those people think of him is, at this point, largely academic. He ran every morning, 5 kilometers, then strength work in the apartment. He'd bought equipment, basic but sufficient, and used it with the focused regularity of someone maintaining a tool they needed to function. His arm was fully recovered. His ribs had been silent for 6 weeks. The body that walked into Madame Shen's gala would be the body of a man who had spent 3 months rebuilding himself from the cellular level up. He had 2 sessions with Mr. Cheng, one to collect a 3rd suit, black tie as requested, cut with the same deliberate economy as the others. One for minor adjustments to the charcoal suit he planned to wear to a dinner with Mr. Fang the week after. Mr. Chung worked in silence and made the adjustments and said as Chen Wei was leaving on the 2nd visit, "You carry yourself differently than when you first came in." "Do I? Less like someone who's decided something." He paused over his work. "More like someone who's already done it." Chen Wei thought about that for the taxi ride home. He told Lin about the gala on a Thursday over their standing lunch. Lin set down his chopsticks and looked at him with the careful attention of a man assessing structural risk. "Liang Guowei will have people there," he said. "He'll have himself there. His security travels light at social events. It's bad optics." Chen Wei broke apart his chopsticks. "And I haven't been findable for 4 months. Whatever image they're working from is the one from before." "You look different," Lin confirmed. "I've thought about this, genuinely. I've sat across from you every week and I've thought, if I had seen you on the street before all of this and then saw you now, would I connect the two?" He paused. "The features are the same. The face is the same. But the weight of you is different. The way you occupy a chair. People don't look for the same man in a different body. That's what I'm counting on. It's not zero risk. Nothing is zero risk. The question is whether the return justifies it." Chen Wei looked at him. "Liang Guowei put me in a hospital. Zhou Hao drove the car. Zhou Fengshan signed off on my termination through channels. I have been building for 4 months and I am going to walk into the same room as all 3 of them and I am going to leave having taken something from each of them that they don't know they've lost yet." He paused. "The risk justifies itself." Lin looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his chopsticks. "What do you need from me?" "Background on who will be there, not the principals. I know the principals, the adjacents. Who matters to Liang in that room? Who Zhou Fengshan needs to impress? What Zhou Hao is trying to prove to which people?" Lin nodded slowly. "I'll have it to you by Sunday." "And Lin?" Chen Wei looked at him steadily. "I need you there. Not as my connection. As yourself. As the journalist you were. There should be at least one person in that room who remembers your byline." Something moved in Lin's face, old and complicated, the expression of a man being offered something he'd thought was gone. He managed it quickly. "My invitation lapsed," he said. 3 years ago. Madame Shen reinstated it this morning," Chen Wei said. "I asked her yesterday. She did it in about 4 minutes." Lin set his chopsticks down again. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. "You didn't tell me you were going to do that." "I knew you'd argue." "I would have argued." "I know." Chen Wei met his eyes. "You've been in that room, Lin. People in that room remember you. That memory is an asset tonight and I intend to use it. But more importantly, you've earned the right to be back in it. That's not a tactic. That's just true." Lin was quiet for a long time. Around them, the noodle shop moved through its lunchtime rhythm, the clatter and steam and low conversation of people eating without thinking about anything more complicated than what they were eating. "Sunday," Lin said finally. "I'll have the background to you Sunday." Lin's briefing arrived Sunday in a 12-page document that was, characteristically, both comprehensive and precise. Chen Wei read it twice, then a 3rd time with a pen in hand, marking the sections that changed his calculations. Joe Howe, it turned out, was in a specific kind of social trouble. 3 months ago, he had made a public claim at a dinner attended by several of the people who would be at Madame Shen's gala about a business venture he was leading independently of his father, a tech investment fund, his first solo operation, designed to establish that he was something other than Zhou Fengshan's son. The fund had quietly failed to raise its target capital. Several of the people at the gala knew this. Zhou Hao knew they knew. He would arrive at the gala carrying the specific anxiety of a man defending a position that has already been quietly conceded. Zhou Fengshan was more straightforwardly powerful, but Lin had identified a pressure point. The official had spent 20 years cultivating a particular social image, the incorruptible technocrat, the administrator who operated by the book. This image was sustained partly by what people didn't look at too closely and partly by the fact that the people with reasons to look closely had not yet been in a position to do so effectively. Lin's notes on this were careful and specific. He had 3 pieces of documentation that he'd held for 2 years waiting for the right moment. Liang Guowei was the most complex. He would arrive with the confidence of a man whose operation had absorbed the Deng Shuo exposure without significant damage and who had been informed through his channels that Chen Wei had disappeared. He would not be looking for Chen Wei. He would be looking for the things he always looked at in these rooms: opportunities, vulnerabilities, the social arithmetic of who was up and who was down and how that arithmetic could be leveraged. He would not be looking for a man named Chen Wei who had built a consultancy and a network and 70 points of something called authority in 4 months from a hospital bed with a broken arm. Nobody in that room would be. That was the point. He called Yue Ning on Friday. He'd attended her show the previous week. The photographs of disappearing buildings hung in a raw concrete space in Jinggan that a friend of hers had lent. There were 40 people there and the work was extraordinary. Not documentary in the flat sense, but something more precise, more emotionally architectural. The photographs made you feel the weight of the spaces they depicted. The absence of the people who'd lived in them was present in the images the way certain kinds of silence are louder than noise. He'd stood in front of a photograph for 7 minutes, a single image of a staircase in a demolished lane house, spiral, wooden, catching afternoon light, a pair of child's shoes left on the 3rd step as if someone had taken them off and not come back. He couldn't account for all 7 minutes. The image had done something to him that he didn't entirely have language for. Yuening had found him in front of it eventually. She'd stood beside him without speaking for a moment. "That one is the hardest to look at," she'd said, "because of the shoes. Because whoever left them didn't know they were leaving for the last time." He'd looked at her then, and she'd been looking at the photograph, and her face had the specific quality of a person who has been thinking about something for a long time and has not fully arrived at what to do with the thinking. He'd bought the photograph, not as a gesture. He genuinely wanted to own it, to have it on a wall somewhere in his life. She'd looked at him when he said so with the evaluating look she gave most things. "Why that one?" she'd asked. "Because the people who lived there should be remembered by something, and the shoes are more specific than any name." She'd looked at him for a moment. Then she'd written up the receipt with the quick, unsentimental efficiency of a person who had decided not to make it a bigger moment than it was, and handed it to him, and moved on to another guest. But when he was leaving, she'd caught his eye across the room and held it for 1 second. Just one. Then she'd turned back to her conversation. He'd thought about that 1 second for 3 days. "The gala is Tuesday," he told her on the phone Friday evening. "I know, Madame Shen's annual." A pause. "Are you going?" "I'm going." He looked at the city from his window. "I'd like you to come with me." A silence. Not the silence of someone deciding, the silence of someone who has already decided and is choosing how to say it. "I don't own anything appropriate for Madame Shen's gala," Yue Ning said. "That's a practical problem," he said. "Not a no." Another pause. He could hear very faintly the sound of her city, slightly different from his. Her apartment was in the Hongkou district, older neighborhood, different acoustic signature. "Why me?" she asked. Not defensively, genuinely curious the way she was genuinely curious about most things. He thought about how to answer honestly. Because I'm going to walk into a room full of people who know how to perform every version of themselves simultaneously, he said. And I want someone beside me who doesn't perform anything. A long pause. That's a strange compliment, she said. It's the truest one I have. He heard her exhale slowly. I'll need 2 days to find something to wear. 2 days is fine. And I'm telling you now, I won't stand quietly in a corner and look decorative. If I'm bored, I'll say so. If I disagree with something someone says, I'll say that too. I'm counting on it, Chen Wei said. She made a sound that was almost, not quite, a laugh. Tuesday, she said. Send me the address. The night of the gala arrived the way significant nights sometimes do, preceded by a day of unusual clarity, as if the atmosphere had made a specific decision about visibility. Chen Wei dressed in the apartment alone, the black suit, white shirt. He did not hurry. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself with the same brief functional assessment he'd been giving himself every morning since the hospital, checking the instrument, not admiring it. The instrument was ready. He put the photograph of the staircase in a box to be hung later. He'd bought a frame the previous week, left it leaning against the wall. He was not superstitious, but he wanted to hang it after tonight, when whatever tonight was would be part of his history rather than his present. He picked up his phone. One message from Lin. I'm here. You're expected. One from Mr. Fang. Enjoy your evening, Mr. Chen. I'll see you Thursday. One from Madam Shen's assistant. Car arranged for 7:45. He sent a brief confirmation to each. He checked the interface once. Authority system. Authority 70 out of 100. Quest activated. The room. Objectives. Enter and be recognized as belonging check. Create one moment of genuine social authority witnessed by at least 10 people. Ensure Liang Guowei, Zhou Hao, and Zhou Fengshan understand by the end of the evening that something has changed. Do not explain what. Let them calculate. Leave before they finish calculating. Reward, plus 20 authority. Unlock, classified, unlocks on completion. Warning, this is not a confrontation. Confrontation is for people who need to prove something. You have already proven it. Tonight you simply reveal it. The difference matters. He picked up Yue Ning at 8:05. She was waiting outside her building when the car arrived. Not the behavior of someone who needed to be collected, but of someone who had decided on a time and honored it. She was wearing a dark green dress, deep and precise, with the clean lines of something chosen for its own integrity rather than to signal effort. Her hair was down, different from how he'd seen it before, deliberately chosen rather than default. She looked like herself at a higher resolution. She got in the car and looked at him briefly and said, "You look like you're going to a negotiation." "I am," he said. She looked at him a moment longer. "Is it going to be unpleasant?" "Parts of it." "For you or for other people?" "Other people, eventually." She considered this with the calm attention she gave most things. "All right," she said. "Tell me what you need from me." "Just be exactly who you are." She looked out the window. "That's either very easy or very complicated, depending on the room." "In this room," he said, "it will be the most powerful thing either of us does tonight." She was quiet for a moment. Then, almost to herself, "I'm beginning to understand that you mean the specific things you say." "Always," Chen Wei said. Madam Shen's annual gala occupied the top 2 floors of a historic building on the Bund, whose renovation had cost more than most city blocks, and whose view of the river at night was the kind that made people understand viscerally why this city existed. They arrived at 8:17. The car stopped at the entrance. A man in uniform opened the door and Chen Wei stepped out first and extended his hand, and Yue Ning took it without performance. Naturally, the way a person accepts something they've decided to accept, and they walked in. The entrance was marble and candlelight, and the low murmur of 200 people who had decided they were important and arranged their lives accordingly. Staff moved with the specific efficiency of people who had been trained for exactly this. Madam Shen found them within 4 minutes. This was itself a statement. Madam Shen did not cross rooms to greet arrivals. Arrivals crossed rooms to greet her. She was the fixed point around which the social architecture of her gala revolved, and she crossed the room to greet Chen Wei, which meant that 200 people with finely calibrated social antennae registered within 30 seconds of his arrival that Madame Chen had made a specific assessment. Mr. Chen. She took his hand with both of hers, another statement, warmth rendered public. She looked at Yue Ning with genuine interest. And this is? Yue Ning, he said. She photographs buildings before they disappear. Madame Chen looked at Yue Ning with a sharpening of interest that was unmistakable. I have a building I've been trying to document for 2 years, she said. My grandmother's family home in Suzhou. Would you be open to a conversation? Yue Ning met her gaze steadily. I'd be interested, she said. No performance, just the clean fact of it. Madame Chen smiled, a real one, and said she would find them later in the evening and moved back into the room. And as she moved, Chen Wei could see the recalibration happening in real time. The eyes that followed her movement back from him. The social arithmetic updating itself. She likes you, Yue Ning said quietly beside him. She respects useful things, Chen Wei said. She's decided I'm one. And what am I? He looked at her briefly. Something better than useful. She absorbed this without comment and looked at the room. Where do we go first? Director Kai was near the bar with 2 men whose body language communicated decades of shared professional history. He saw Chen Wei across the room and lifted his glass slightly, a minimal gesture that nonetheless communicated clearly to anyone watching that Kai had identified someone worth acknowledging. 3 people near Kai tracked the direction of the glass. Chen Wei did not move toward Kai immediately. He moved toward Mr. Fang, who was standing near the window overlooking the river with his wife, a small, precise woman who had the unimpressed intelligence of someone who had spent 40 years watching powerful men confuse their net worth with their significance. Mr. Chen. Fang shook his hand with the uncomplicated warmth of someone who doesn't perform warmth. The Yangshan problem, completely cleared in 3 weeks. My operations director wants to frame your analysis and put it on the wall. It was a straightforward observation, Chen Wei said. The straightforward observations are always the ones nobody makes. Fang looked at Yue Ning with polite interest. Chen Wei introduced her. Fang's wife looked at her photography work with more than polite interest. She asked 3 specific questions and listened to the answers with the attention of someone who was actually registering them. They stood by the window for 12 minutes. Lin appeared from across the room and joined them, looking, Chen Wei noted, like a man who had remembered something important about himself. He was standing straighter than usual. His jacket was good, one of Chen Wei's, altered by Mr. Cheng in 2 hours last Saturday, because Lin's own formal wear had become aspirational rather than functional in the years since his previous life. You look well, Jianming, Mr. Fang said, with the easy familiarity of 2 men who had once occupied adjacent professional worlds. Lin Jianming looked at him for a moment. I'm getting there, he said, and meant it. It was 40 minutes into the evening when Zhou Hao found them. Chen Wei had been aware of him for 20 minutes, had tracked his position through the room with the peripheral attention of someone who learned to monitor a space without appearing to monitor it. Zhou Hao was working the room with the specific energy of a man who needed the room to validate something. He was talking too much, laughing slightly too readily. His date, not Mei Xiu, a different woman, younger, visibly uncomfortable with the caliber of the event, kept touching her bracelet as if checking it was still there. Zhou Hao was drinking, not heavily but consistently, which was worse. He came around a column near the east side of the room and saw Chen Wei from approximately 15 feet away. The recognition was not instant. Chen Wei watched it happen in stages. The initial glance that registered a man in a black suit near the window, the continuation past, the return, the slower look, the frown, the calculation. The specific sequence of a man trying to reconcile 2 images that shouldn't coexist. Chen Wei did not look away, did not adjust his expression. He held Lin Jianming's eye and continued what he'd been saying, something about a market trend Lin had mentioned, and let Zhou Hao arrive at his own conclusions in his own time. Zhou Hao crossed the room. He didn't do it smoothly. He did it with the slightly too deliberate movement of someone who has decided to do something and is already committed before the wisdom of it has fully processed. He stopped in front of Chen Wei. Around them, the ambient conversation continued. But two or three people nearby adjusted their orientation slightly, the social instinct of people who sense that something is happening and position themselves to observe it. Chen Wei, Zhou Hao said. He said it the way a man names something he doesn't understand but wants to appear to understand. Zhou Hao. Chen Wei said it the way you acknowledge a minor entry on a list. Zhou Hao looked at him. The suit, the posture, Lin Jianming beside him, Yue Ning, the view of the river behind them that Madame Shen had effectively designated as Chen Wei's location by virtue of bringing him to it first. He was processing. Chen Wei could see the processing. I didn't expect to see you here, Zhou Hao said. I didn't expect to still be in the country, Chen Wei said pleasantly. But here we are. Zhou Hao's expression moved. Something flickered behind it, something that recognized the weight of that sentence without being certain it was a threat or a statement. What are you doing here? Having a conversation with my colleagues. He gestured slightly at Lin and Mr. Fang. Yourself. This is Madame Shen's gala. It is, Chen Wei agreed. She's been an excellent host. Zhou Hao stared at him. The young man's processing was visible and not flattering, the specific struggle of someone whose mental model of a situation has stopped corresponding to observable reality and who hasn't yet decided what to do about the gap. The last time I saw you, he started. You were in a car, Chen Wei said. His voice was perfectly level, not cold, not warm, precisely calibrated to the temperature of a man noting a fact about the weather. Moving quickly, three people near them were now not pretending to be in other conversations. Zhou Hao's date touched her bracelet again. She looked like she wanted to be somewhere else, which was a correct instinct. Zhou Hao began. You're interrupting, Yue Ning said. Her voice was completely calm, not aggressive, the tone of someone making an accurate observation. Zhou Hao looked at her as if he'd forgotten she was there, which was a significant error in judgment. I wasn't, he started. Mr. Chen was mid-sentence, she said. It's a habit worth correcting. Zhou Hao stared at her. He had the specific look of a man who has been unexpectedly spoken to correctly by someone he had dismissed before they opened their mouth. His date suppressed something that was almost a smile. The three nearby conversationalists were now fully committed to listening. Zhou Hao looked back at Chen Wei. Something had shifted in his expression. The bravado had gone somewhere else, and what was underneath it was less comfortable. We should talk, he said low. Properly. We are talking, Chen Wei said, quite publicly. He let that land. Then he turned back to Lin Jianming. You were saying about the Eastern Corridor infrastructure? Lin, without missing a beat. The bottleneck is the same as it's been for 2 years. The question is who has the nerve to address it directly. Zhou Hao stood in front of them for 3 more seconds. Then he took his date by the arm and moved away. In his peripheral vision, Chen Wei saw Director Kai, who had drifted closer during the exchange, turn back to his own conversation with the small, private expression of a man who has just confirmed something he suspected. 40 minutes later, Liang Guowei saw him. Chen Wei was with Madame Shen, who had come to find him as promised, and was deep in conversation with Yue Ning about the Suzhou property, their backs to most of the room. Chen Wei was listening but also watching the room's reflection in the dark window glass, the river behind it, and in the window's surface, the room's movement like a slow, deliberate tide. He saw Liang Guowei in the reflection. The tycoon was moving through the room with the settled authority of a man who owned the space he occupied regardless of who had rented it. He was with 3 people, 2 who moved like adjacents, 1 who moved like security wearing a suit badly. Liang's gaze traveled the room with the professional sweep of a man who spent his life reading rooms and knew exactly what he was doing. The sweep stopped. In the window glass, Chen Wei watched Liang Guowei go still, not dramatically, a fraction. The stillness of a very controlled man receiving information that required recalibration. His eyes were on the back of Chen Wei's head, or on the suit, or on some combination of posture and location and context that had triggered something. Chen Wei did not turn around. He continued listening to Yue Ning and Madame Shen. He said one thing about the light quality in old Suzhou buildings that made Madame Shen look at him with genuine surprise. He picked up his glass and sipped from it and set it down. In the window glass, he watched Liang Guowei say something quiet to the man who moved like security. The man moved away, toward the bar, which put him at an angle from which he could observe Chen Wei directly. Chen Wei noted this, filed it, continued his conversation. 3 minutes later, he heard footsteps stop behind him. Mr. Chen. Liang Guowei's voice was exactly as he remembered it. The quality of someone who had never found it necessary to raise their voice because the volume was beside the point, the weight was the point, and the weight was always there regardless of volume. Chen Wei turned. This moment, the turning, the facing, he had thought about many times in the past 4 months. He had imagined it happening in different contexts, had run the variables, had considered what it would feel like. What he had not fully anticipated was how unremarkable it would feel to stand in front of this man in a room of 200 people and feel nothing that required management. Not nothing. He felt something. But it was cold and very still and entirely under control. And control of this quality was indistinguishable from absence to anyone watching. Liang Guowei looked at him with the careful attention of a man who is very intelligent and has learned to distrust his own certainties when reality stops confirming them. He had aged less than 4 months should have allowed, the kind of man whose money bought the appearance of stillness from time. But something in his face was doing the work of processing, and the processing was not comfortable. Mr. Liang, Chen Wei said, warm. Exactly as warm as the situation called for, not more. I wasn't aware you'd be here this evening, Liang said. I wasn't aware you kept track of my calendar, Chen Wei said pleasantly. Liang's eyes moved briefly to the window behind Chen Wei, to Madame Shen beside him, to the room beyond. The social arithmetic running fast, he was measuring. Chen Wei let him measure. You've been busy, Liang said. The word busy had a question in it and a threat in it simultaneously. 4 months is a long time, Chen Wei said. A person can get a great deal done in 4 months if they have the right motivation. A pause. Liang held his gaze with the practiced steadiness of a man who had won many encounters by refusing to be the first to look away. Chen Wei did not look away. He was very comfortable looking at Liang Guowei because Liang Guowei no longer meant the same thing he'd meant 4 months ago. He was a problem that had already been scoped, a solution that was still being assembled, nothing more. We should have a private conversation, Liang said. I'm happy to have a conversation, Chen Wei said. Though I find that private conversations at public events rarely stay private, this room is very good at listening. He looked around briefly at the 3 people who had drifted within conversational range, at Director Kai 20 feet away who was doing an excellent impression of someone not paying attention. Don't you find? Liang Guowei looked at him for a long moment. What passed across his face in that moment was something Chen Wei recognized from 3 years of arrest scenes. The specific expression of a person who has committed to a course of action and is arriving in real time at the understanding that the terrain has changed and the course of action no longer applies. Not fear, something more sophisticated than fear, recognition. You've made some interesting friends, Liang said quietly. I've made friends who deserve the company, Chen Wei said. And I've stopped spending time with people who don't. Liang held his gaze a final moment. Then he inclined his head, not a bow, not deference, the minimal social acknowledgement of a man who has decided to end a conversation on terms he is pretending to have chosen. He turned and moved back into the room. Chen Wei watched him go in the window glass. The man who moved like security was already on his phone. Madame Shen had observed the entire exchange from beside him. When Liang was gone, she said without inflection, "That was interesting." "Was it?" Chen Wei said. Liang Guowei has not deferred to anyone in this room in the 12 years I've been hosting this event. She picked up her glass. He didn't defer just now, but he ended a conversation he started. In my experience, those are different versions of the same thing. She looked at him with the full, precise attention she reserved for things she was genuinely trying to understand. Who are you, Mr. Chen? Someone who's building something, he said. As I mentioned. You mentioned it didn't have a name yet? It has a name now. She waited. Qingming Advisory, he said. though by next year that name will be the small version of what it becomes. Madame Shen looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, with the specificity of someone making a decision rather than a compliment, I'm going to introduce you to 4 people before the end of this evening. Pay attention to which ones you'd like to know better. I'll arrange it. Thank you, Chen Wei said. Don't thank me, she said. I do this because it's good for my room. You should know that. I know, he said. That's why I trust it. She looked at him with something that was almost a smile. Then she went to find the 4 people. Meiso found him in the corridor near the coat room at 10:40. He had gone to make a phone call. Fang's operations director had sent a message requiring a brief response and was coming back to the main room when he heard his name, not loudly, quietly. The voice of someone who had been watching for an opportunity and found one. He stopped. She was standing near the wall of the corridor, slightly away from the main traffic of the gala, a woman who had positioned herself with care, which meant she'd been waiting. She was in a red dress, excellent, the kind that cost real money, and her hair was done with real effort, and she looked very well, objectively, in the way a person looks very well when they've had access to things that make looking well easier. She also looked like someone who had been stealing herself for several minutes. Mei Shu, he said. Wei. She said his name the old way, the way from before, the shortened intimacy of 2 people who had shared an apartment and a life and 6 years of ordinary mornings, deployed now in this corridor as a key to a door that no longer had that lock. He stood still and waited. He was not going to make this easier. You look... She stopped, started again. You look well. Thank you. I didn't know you'd be here. People keep saying that, he said. A pause. She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. I've wanted to talk to you. For a while. I didn't know how to... She stopped again. Zhou Hao told me he saw you earlier. He was strange about it. Quiet. That seems right, Chen Wei said. She met his eyes directly for the first time. Hers were doing something complicated, not simple guilt, something more layered. The expression of a person who has had months to construct a narrative about themselves and is standing in front of the person that narrative required to be a different shape. I made a terrible decision, she said, quietly, directly. Whatever she'd prepared something honest. I made several, and I know you have no reason to hear anything I say, but I need you to know that I understand what I did, what I was. She paused. I was scared. It wasn't about you. I mean, it was about you, but it wasn't about who you were. It was about what I was afraid of, and She stopped. I'm saying this badly. You're saying it clearly, he said. She looked at him. Are you angry? He thought about this honestly, not as performance, genuinely considered it. No, he said. Not anymore. Something in her expression. Relief started to form and then encountered something in his tone and stopped. That's not forgiveness, he said. It's just accurate. Anger is for when something still has the capacity to hurt you. He held her gaze. Mei Shu, you left. You made the decision I thought you'd never make, and you made it the same night, and you made it for someone who was the most available option and the most financially convenient one. I know that. I knew it then. He paused. And Zhou Hao drove a car into me. That's not something you say sorry for and then we're even. That's a different category entirely. She went very pale. I didn't know he was going to... You said something to him in the window. He said it without heat, just the fact of it. You saw me coming and you said something to him and he accelerated. She opened her mouth, closed it. I'm not going to have you arrested, he said. That's not how this ends. He looked at her for a moment. But I want you to know that I know exactly what happened and exactly why, and I want you to carry that knowing. He paused. That's all. She was very still. He looked at her for one more moment, at the woman he'd thought he was building a life with, standing in a corridor in a red dress carrying the weight of what she'd done and what she'd allowed, and felt something that surprised him with its steadiness. Not love, not hatred. Something clean and final. The feeling of a door that has been properly closed. "Have a good evening," he said. He walked back into the room. The gala wound down after midnight. Chenwei found Lin near the bar at 11:45, and they stood together for a few minutes without talking, watching the room settle into its late evening configuration. The people who lingered for the conversation and the people lingering to be seen lingering and the people who had accomplished what they came for and were beginning the architecture of their departure. "How was it?" Lin said finally. "Productive," Chenwei said. Lin looked sideways at him. "All three?" "All three." A pause. "And Mei Shu. She found me in the corridor." Lin was quiet. And I said what needed saying." Chenwei looked at the room. She already knew it. She just needed to hear it said aloud by the right person. Lin nodded slowly. "Zhou Hao left at 10:30. His driver told someone he was quiet in the car." "Good." "Liang Guowei left at 11. He made 2 phone calls in the car park before he got in. Bao Iron Tong received one of them." Chenwei looked at him. "You have someone watching his calls?" "I have someone watching his securities movement. It amounts to the same thing." Lin set down his glass. "He's recalculating. He knows you're not what he thought. He doesn't know yet what you are." He paused. "That window is going to close." "I know," Chenwei said. "The next phase doesn't give him time to figure it out before it's too late." Lin looked at him for a moment. "You've been planning this already." "Since the hospital," Chenwei said simply. They stood in comfortable silence for a minute. Around them, the gala completed its slow exhalation, the candlelight steady, the river dark beyond the windows, the city below doing what it always did regardless of what happened above it. Yuening found them at 11:52. She was carrying her small clutch and her jacket was over one arm, and she had the look of a person who had consumed exactly what was nourishing from the evening and was ready to leave the rest. "Madame Shen gave me the contact information for 4 other historic buildings," she said. "She wants to commission a series." She said this with the plain astonishment of someone who hasn't fully processed good news yet. "A full series. A book, possibly." Chenwei looked at her. "Congratulations," he said, and meant it completely, unambiguously, without any contamination from strategy. She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression, not softening exactly, more like a decision quietly made. "Take me home," she said, "and tell me what actually happened tonight." He got their coats. He told Lin he'd call tomorrow. He walked out with Yue Ning into the cool night and the river air and the city that had been here for centuries and would be here for centuries more, indifferent and magnificent, and felt the interface pulse once, warm and brief, and did not open it until they were in the car. Quest complete, the room. Objectives, entered as belonging check. Social authority moment, witnessed by 14 people, Liang exchange check. All 3 targets seated with uncertainty, check had departed before resolution check. Plus 20 authority. Total 90/100. Unlock now revealed. The architect's tools. You now have the infrastructure, the network, and the positioning to execute. The next phase is not about building. It is about using what you built. Liang Guowei recalculating. 48 to 72 hours before he acts. Prepare accordingly. Zhou Hao, destabilized, vulnerable. His next public move will be defensive. This is useful. Zhou Fengshan. Observed you with Madame Shen, Mr. Fang, and Director Kai. He has already made calls. He knows the names. He is afraid in the specific way of men who built their safety on other people not knowing things. Mei Shu, closed. Move forward. Yuening, she chose to stay. Authority 90/100. 10 points remain. You know what they require. Final quest loading. Endgame. He closed the interface. Yuening was looking out the car window at the city going past, the river, then the streets, then the districts he knew by heart from years of walking them in the dark. "You're going to tell me some of it," she said, not a question. "Some of it," he agreed. "And the rest?" "The rest is still happening." She turned from the window and looked at him directly, the evaluating look, the one she gave buildings and photographs and people she was trying to see clearly. "The men at the gala," she said. "Liang Guowei, the younger one who was rude to you and left early. These aren't just professional relationships." "No," he said. "They hurt you." He looked at her. "One of them had me fired. One of them drove a car into me, the older one." He paused. The older one started all of it. She absorbed this. Outside the window, the city moved past. "And tonight?" she said. "Tonight was the beginning of the end," he said. "For them." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Are you a good person doing something necessary or a person who has made something necessary into a virtue?" He looked at her, at the honesty of the question, the complete absence of performance in it. "I don't know," he said. "I think about that. I think the answer is that I was a good person who was destroyed by people who assumed that made me safe to destroy, and I decided they were wrong about that." He paused. "I haven't done anything I'm ashamed of. I haven't hurt anyone who didn't choose to be in the way." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she turned back to the window. "All right," she said quietly. It was, he understood, not absolution. It was something more useful, a person choosing to remain beside him with their eyes open, knowing what they knew and choosing anyway. The car moved through the city, 90 points of authority, 10 remaining. The endgame was loading. The call from Iron Tong came 3 days after the gala. Not to Chen Wei, to Lin Jianming, which was itself a message. Liang Guowei had done his homework in 72 hours and had arrived at the correct conclusion. The man at Madame Shen's gala was the same man his people had put in a hospital 4 months ago, and the journalist who had been quietly circulating damaging information about his operation for the past 2 months was connected to him. The homework was good. The conclusion was correct. The message was simple. Mr. Liang would like to resolve the situation. He is prepared to be generous. Lin forwarded it to Chen Wei at 7 a.m. with a single line of his own appended. "He's scared. Scared men offer money. What do you want me to tell him?" Chen Wei read it sitting at his kitchen table with coffee going cold beside him and the morning light coming through the window at the angle that made the city look like a different city, quieter, more honest, stripped of its nighttime ambitions. He typed back, "Tell him nothing. Don't respond." Lin, "Nothing." Chen Wei, "A man who responds to that message is a man who can be negotiated with. I'm not negotiating." A pause, then, "Understood." He put the phone down and looked at the morning light and thought about what came next with the clear, unhurried attention of a man who has been planning this for 4 months and is now simply executing the plan. The time for building was over. Quest activated, endgame. Authority, 90 over 110 points remaining. Final objectives, 3 simultaneous falls executed in sequence, each one accelerating the next. Target 1, Liang Guowei method. Destroy the business architecture. Not the man, the empire. Leave him standing in the ruins of what he built so he understands fully what he's lost. Target 2, Zhao Fengshan. Method, the social and professional structure he built over 20 years collapses in one public moment. He will not see it coming because he has been watching the wrong direction. Target 3, Zhou Hao method, the last, the most public, the one the city watches. This is the face slap that ends it. Rule, stay clean, stay above. A man who descends to his enemy's level has already lost the more important fight. You are not becoming them. You are becoming what they cannot reach. Execute. He started with Liang Guowei's money. Not directly. Chen Wei never touched it directly. He used 3 instruments, each one clean and legal and surgical. The first was Mr. Fang. 2 weeks before the gala, during one of their working sessions, Fang had mentioned in passing that Liang Guowei's logistics operation had been trying for 3 years to secure a partnership with Fang's cold chain infrastructure. Liang needed Fang's network to move certain cargo that his own operation couldn't handle at scale. Fang had kept him at arm's length, not because of anything specific, but because Liang's business practices had always created a faint unease in Fang that he'd never been able to fully articulate. Chen Wei had filed this away and said nothing. Now he called Fang and articulated it for him. He laid out in an hour-long meeting in Fang's office what Lin's 3 years of research had assembled, the specific logistics contracts that Liang used to move cargo that was not what the documentation said it was. Not speculative, documented. Invoice discrepancies, routing anomalies, the pattern of payments to port officials that Lin had traced through 7 layers of corporate architecture to their source. Fang listened without speaking. His hands were flat on the desk, the same gesture Chen Wei had seen once in a chief superintendent's office, but different in every way that mattered. This was a man receiving information that confirmed something he'd already suspected and deciding what to do with the confirmation. When Chen Wei finished, Fang looked at the documents for a long moment. "If I take this to my lawyers," he said carefully, "and they find it as solid as it looks." "It will hold," Chen Wei said. "Lin Jianming spent 3 years building it. He doesn't build things that don't hold." "Liang will know it came from my direction." "Yes," Chen Wei said. "He'll know. And he'll know that you knew and chose to act anyway, which tells him something important about the current landscape." Fang looked at him steadily. "You've been planning this since before the gala." "Since before I met you," Chen Wei said. A long pause. Fang looked at the documents. Then, "I've been wanting a reason to clean this up for 2 years. I didn't have the documentation." He looked at Chen Wei. "You gave me the documentation. Consider it the return on the investment you made when you took my phone call," Chen Wei said. Fang picked up his phone. "I'm calling my lawyers this afternoon," he said, "and I'm calling 2 other parties who have been waiting for this kind of basis to act." He paused. "This moves fast once it starts, Chen Wei. Faster than you might expect." "I'm ready for fast," Chen Wei said. The second instrument was Director Kai, not an article. Chen Wei had been clear about that from the beginning. Not a public exposé, not a media campaign. Something more precise and more devastating, a quiet withdrawal of confidence by the right people in the right rooms. Director Kai had spent 40 years understanding that the real architecture of power was not in newspapers or broadcasts, but in the conversations that happened before them. The dinner where someone said, "I've been hearing some concerning things about Liang's operation," to someone who would say the same to someone else, and by the time it reached the room where investment decisions were made, it had the quality of established fact rather than rumor because it had passed through enough credible mouths. He had lunch with Kai on a Wednesday and laid out what he needed. Kai listened with the careful attention of a man who understood exactly what was being asked and why, and what it would cost him to do it. "This is not journalism," Kai said. "No," Chen Wei said. "It's more efficient than journalism." "It's also not nothing. Liang will know eventually that someone seeded this. He'll trace it." "By the time he traces it," Chen Wei said, "the thing it was seeding will have already grown past the point where tracing the seed matters." Kai turned his coffee cup in his hands, the same gesture as the rooftop, the gesture of a man working through a decision. "What do you need me to say, and to whom?" Chen Wei told him. Specific, targeted, true. Every word that would be said was documentably accurate, which was what made it different from a smear campaign and what made Kai willing to say it. The director would not spread falsehoods. He would spread truths that had not yet been widely known in the rooms where they were most relevant. 3 conversations, Kai said finally. "I can place 3 conversations in the right places in the next 10 days. 3 is sufficient," Chen Wei said. Kai looked at him across the table. "You're very calm about this." "I've been thinking about it for 4 months, Chen Wei said. The calm is earned. The third instrument was the one Chen Wei had not told Lin or Fang or Kai about. It was a lawyer named Miss Jiang, a partner at a firm that specialized in corporate liability and financial crime, retained through an introduction from Madame Shen, who had known her for 15 years and described her as the most precise person I've ever met, which in her field means the most dangerous. Ms. Jiang had reviewed Lin's documentation in 2 days and come back with an assessment that was simultaneously damning and legally bulletproof. The evidence of financial misconduct in Liang's operation was sufficient for a civil complaint that, once filed, would trigger a regulatory inquiry that would, once public, constitute a secondary event that any serious investor or business partner would be unable to ignore without themselves taking on liability. The filing was not a criminal case. It was better than a criminal case. Criminal cases took years. A well-documented civil complaint against a public business figure, filed by a law firm with Zhang's reputation, became public record the moment it was filed and generated its own momentum independent of the legal outcome. Chen Wei had funded the filing through Qingming Advisory's operational account. He had not attached his name to the complaint. There were other parties named as plaintiffs, business partners of Liang's who had been wronged in documented ways and who Ms. Jiang had identified and approached. Chen Wei was the architecture behind the filing. He was not in the document. This was the rule the system had given him and the rule he'd given himself. Stay clean, stay above. It moved fast, as Fang had predicted. Day 1, Ms. Jiang filed. The complaint entered public record at 9 a.m. By noon, it had been picked up by 2 financial news outlets, not front page, not sensational, but present. Civil complaint filed against Liang Guowei Holdings, citing financial misconduct in logistics operations. The language was precise and boring and devastating. By 3 p.m., 2 of Liang's major investors had requested emergency meetings with his office. By 7 p.m., a third investor had quietly begun unwinding a position. Day 2. Kai's 3 conversations had happened over the preceding 10 days, and their product was now visible. The rooms that mattered were no longer extending Liang Guowei the specific social credit that had protected him for 2 decades. The phone calls that would previously have been returned were going unreturned. The dinners at which his name came up were now dinners at which his name came up differently. Day 3. Fang made his move. A formal statement, not a press release, a letter to his own investors and board, noting that Fang Logistics had concluded its evaluation of a potential partnership with Liang Guowei Holdings and had decided not to proceed, citing concerns about the operational integrity of certain business practices. In the world of high-level business communication, this was a grenade with its pin pulled. Every person who received the letter understood exactly what it meant, and every person who received it called someone else who needed to know. Day 4, Liang Guowei's stock, the holding company was publicly listed, a small portion of the empire's surface area, dropped 17%. Day 5. 2 of the port officials whose relationship with Liang's operation Lin had documented were called in for internal review by their respective agencies. This was not Chen Wei's doing. This was the natural consequence of the complaint entering the regulatory ecosystem. Investigators read complaints, investigators noticed names, investigators did their jobs. Day 6, Iron Tong was arrested. Not on anything connected to Chen Wei, on a separate matter, an assault charge from 18 months ago that had been in the system waiting for someone with sufficient motivation to push it forward. Lin had identified it. Ms. Jiang had made 1 phone call to 1 contact in the prosecutorial office. It was legal. It was clean. It removed from the board the one piece that could have caused Chen Wei direct physical harm. Bao Iron Tong, photographed entering a police station in handcuffs, was the image that accompanied the financial news stories when they escalated from the business pages to the front section. Day 7. Liang Guowei did not appear at a public function he had been confirmed to attend. His office issued a statement citing personal matters. The statement was not believed by anyone who read it. Chen Wei watched all of this from a remove. He did not celebrate each development. He noted them, updated his assessment, moved to the next necessary action. Lin sent daily briefings, Ms. Jiang sent legal updates, Fang checked in twice. Kai said nothing. Their arrangement had concluded, and Kai, with the discretion of a man who understood how these things worked, had moved back to his own affairs. On the 6th evening, Chen Wei sat in his apartment with a glass of water and looked at the city and allowed himself to feel, for exactly 10 minutes, the full weight of what was happening. He had been a man on a kitchen floor bleeding from a warning. He had been a man in a hospital bed with a broken arm and no visitors. He had been a man in a room above a hardware store with 4,200 yen and a promise to himself. And now Liang Guowei's empire was coming apart, in the specific public documented way that empires come apart when the architecture beneath them has been correctly identified and precisely dismantled. He felt satisfaction, clean, cold, earned. Then the 10 minutes ended and he went back to work. Zhou Fengshan felt differently. Liang's collapse was financial and corporate, visible in markets and legal filings and investor communications. Zhou Fengshan's collapse was social, which in his world was the same thing as existential. The official had built 20 years of reputation on a particular image: the incorruptible administrator, the man who operated by the book, the public servant whose hands were clean. This image had survived because the people with reasons to challenge it had not had the standing, the documentation, or the moment. Lin had the documentation. Chen Wei had created the standing. Madame Shen had provided the moment. It was Madame Shen who moved, and she moved of her own accord, which was what made it clean. 2 days after Liang's complaint was filed, Madame Shen hosted a smaller gathering, 30 people, the inner tier of her network, the kind of dinner where the conversation did the work that public statements couldn't. She had been given through Chen Wei the specific information about Zhou Fengshan's documented intervention in Chen Wei's wrongful termination, the calls made, the pressure applied, the process subverted. Not a dramatic dossier. 3 emails and a phone record authenticated by Lin's contacts. She read them on a Sunday afternoon and called Chen Wei. "This is real," she said. "It's real. You were a police officer." "I was." "He had you fired for doing your job correctly." "Yes." A pause. "I've had Zhou Fengshan at my table for 15 years, she said. Not with heat, with the specific quiet anger of someone who has discovered that their hospitality has been extended to something that didn't deserve it. His wife is on 2 of my charitable boards." "I know," Chen Wei said. "I'm not asking you to do anything, Madame Shen." "I know you're not," she said, and ended the call. What Madame Shen did was this: she stopped. She stopped returning Zhou Fengshan's wife's calls with the usual promptness. She stopped including his name on the list for her next gathering. When a mutual acquaintance asked if she'd seen the official recently, she said, with the precise neutrality of someone choosing their words with surgical care, "We've had some questions about certain things. I'm sure it will sort itself out." In Madame Shen's world, this sentence was a detonation. Within a week, the social architecture around Zhou Fengshan had begun its restructuring. The invitations that had arrived reliably for 2 decades arrived less reliably. The calls he made to certain rooms were returned more slowly. The people who had attended his functions were suddenly busy on the dates he proposed. This was not coordinated. This was the natural behavior of a social ecosystem removing something that had been identified as contaminated. Madame Shen was the signal. The network responded to the signal. Director Kai, in one of his 3 conversations, had mentioned in the right room that there were questions about certain officials' involvement in matters that would not reflect well on the people associated with them. He had not named Zhou Fengshan. He hadn't needed to. The room had named him for itself. The formal consequence arrived 3 weeks later, an internal affairs inquiry, opened by Zhou Fengshan's own agency following an anonymous tip, Lin's work, untraceable, clean, about procedural irregularities in personnel decisions made 3 years ago. The inquiry was not yet public. But in the world Zhou Fengshan inhabited, nothing stayed not public for long, and the people who needed to know already knew. He resigned his post on a Tuesday morning citing health reasons and a desire to spend time with family. The announcement appeared on page 6 of the city section. Nobody who mattered was fooled by page 6. Chen Wei heard about the resignation from Lin at noon. He was in a meeting with a new client, a mid-sized tech company with a board dynamics problem that was being expressed as an operational problem, which was how board dynamics problems usually presented, and he stepped out to take Lin's call, listened for 45 seconds, said understood, and went back into the meeting. He finished the meeting. He answered 3 emails. He called Ms. Jiang to update on a legal matter. He booked a dinner with Yue Ning for Thursday. At no point did he allow himself to feel triumphant, because triumph was for endings, and this was not yet an ending. Zhou Hao was still standing. Zhou Hao's destruction was the one Chen Wei had been most careful about. Not because he felt anything protective toward him, because Zhou Hao had driven a car into him at speed on a public street in front of a witness, And that fact existed in the world regardless of what had or hadn't been done about it legally, and the handling of it required more precision than the other two because it was the most personal, and the most personal things were the easiest to handle badly. He had thought about this for 4 months. He had run the options. He had set aside 3 approaches that would have worked, but that would have left him with something sticky on his hands, not legally, but in the way that certain victories leave a residue. He wanted to be clean at the end of this, completely clean, not just technically, but actually. The approach he landed on had come from Yue Ning inadvertently on the night of the gala, when she'd asked him in the car if he was a good person doing something necessary or a person who had made something necessary into a virtue. The question had reframed something he'd been looking at wrong. He wasn't trying to punish Zhou Hao. He was trying to ensure that Zhou Hao could never do to anyone else what he had done to Chen Wei. The distinction changed the method. The business award ceremony was Director Kai's suggestion. It was an annual event, large, televised on a regional business channel, attended by the city's commercial and political upper tier. Kai sat on the awards committee. He had been sitting on it for 8 years and had in that time developed a quiet but absolute influence over certain aspects of the programming. He called Chen Wei on a Monday morning and said, "There's a segment, Rising Figures in the City's Business Landscape, 3 minutes, pre-recorded package, then a brief live appearance on stage. The committee meets Thursday to finalize the list." A pause. "Your name has been proposed." Chen Wei understood immediately. "By whom?" "By me," Kai said. "Because it's accurate. You've built something real in 4 months and the right rooms know it. This is not a fabrication." He paused. "But the timing is useful. Zhou Hao will be there." "Zhou Hao's father was on the committee until 2 weeks ago," Kai said dryly. "His son's attendance was a standing arrangement. It hasn't been rescinded yet because nobody's gotten around to it." Chen Wei thought for a moment. "I'll accept the nomination," he said, "on one condition." "Which is?" "The pre-recorded package. I want to be able to review the questions in advance." "Standard practice," Kai said. "And I want the journalist who conducts the live Q&A to be someone who knows the full story." A silence. "How full?" Kai said carefully. "The car," Chen Wei said. Another silence. Longer. Then, "That's a significant thing to put on live television." "It doesn't have to be on television," Chen Wei said. "It has to happen in the room, with witnesses. The cameras are incidental." Kai was quiet for a long time. "The journalist would need to be willing to ask the question unprompted," he said finally, "in front of an audience of 400 people." "Yes." "That journalist would need to understand exactly what they were doing and choose to do it freely." "Yes." "And this journalist would need to be someone whose credibility was unimpeachable." A pause. "Lin Jianming," Chen Wei said. Kai was quiet for 10 seconds. Then, "He hasn't published under his byline in 3 years." "I know," Chen Wei said. "This will change that." He told Lin that evening. They were at the noodle shop. The same table, the same corner, the original geography of whatever this had become between them. Lin had his newspaper. He hadn't annotated it yet. He listened to Chen Wei's proposal with his hands around his tea and his eyes on the table and his face doing the careful work of a man receiving something significant and determining what to do with it. When Chen Wei finished, Lin was quiet for a long time. "You're asking me to come back," he said finally. "I'm asking you to be what you always were," Chen Wei said. "The timing is coincidental." "It's not coincidental." "No," Chen Wei admitted. "But the question is real regardless of the timing. Zhou Hao drove a car into a person and the case was buried because of who his father was. That's a true thing. It should be a question a journalist asks." Lin looked at the table. "If I ask that question on live television, I am back," he said. "With everything that comes with back. The people who made it necessary for me to leave in the first place are currently occupied with their own problems," Chen Wei said. Lin looked up at him. "Liang's operation is in collapse," Chen Wei said. "Zhou Fengshan resigned this morning. The people who had reasons to want you quiet 3 years ago are no longer in positions from which they can want things effectively." He paused. "Lin, you've been waiting for this window for 3 years. It's open. Lin Jianming looked at him for a long, steady moment. Something moved in his face, old and complicated and real. The expression of a man who has been carrying something for a long time and has just been shown credibly that he can set it down. What's the question exactly? Lin said. Chen Wei told him. Lin wrote it down on the margin of his newspaper, looked at it, then looked at Chen Wei. I'll ask it, he said. The award ceremony was on a Friday evening. Chen Wei arrived alone. Yue Ning had offered to come. He'd said no and had explained why. This is the last of it. I want to walk into this room as only what I am without context. When I walk out, I'll be whoever I am after this, and I'd like you to be part of that version. She'd looked at him for a moment and said, all right, and then, call me when it's done. The venue was a conference center in the Lujiazui Financial District, large, corporate, the kind of space designed to make 500 people feel like they were attending something important. The awards programming was the kind that moved through categories with efficient solemnity, each award presented with a brief video package and a handshake and polite applause. Chen Wei sat at a table near the front assigned to him by the organizing committee, a placement that Kai had arranged because placement in these rooms was never accidental. He scanned the room on arrival, methodically, the way he'd scanned every room for 4 months. Liang Guowei was not there. He had not been there since day 7 of the collapse. The man who had laughed at Chen Wei on a pavement outside a stopped Bentley was currently not appearing at public functions. Zhou Fengshan was not there. He had resigned 3 days ago, citing health reasons, and was, according to Lin's sources, not leaving his house. Zhou Hao was there. He was at a table near the middle of the room, not the front, not the back, the specific middle of a man whose social positioning had recently declined from its previous altitude and had not yet found a new level to stabilize at. He was with 2 people who had the look of obligation rather than choice. His table did not have a bottle of the good wine. His name was not on the program. He was there because canceling would have been its own kind of statement. Chen Wei noted his location and looked away and did not look at him again for 90 minutes. The Rising Figures segment came third in the program. The video package was 3 minutes. Qingming Advisory, its work, its results. Brief quotes from Mr. Fang and from a client whose business Chen Wei had restructured in 6 weeks. The production was clean and factual. The facts, presented cleanly, were enough. The applause when it ended was the applause of a room responding to something real rather than performing approval. Chen Wei had learned to distinguish between these 2 kinds of applause. This was the real kind. Lin Jianming walked onto the stage. The room did something specific when it registered his face. A ripple, recognition, recalculation, the sound of 400 people updating a mental file simultaneously. Lin Jianming's byline had appeared in this city's serious publications for 15 years. It had been absent for 3. Its return on this stage, on this evening, was a statement whose meaning everyone in the room could read. Lin stood at the microphone with the posture of a man who had remembered something important about himself. He looked out at the room. Then he looked at Chen Wei. Mr. Chen, he said, Qingming Advisory has moved very quickly in a very short time. What would you say is the foundational principle of your work? Chen Wei took the microphone. Clarity, he said. About what's actually true versus what's been made comfortable to believe. Most problems persist because the people involved have negotiated their understanding of them down to something they can live with. I'm not interested in what people can live with. I'm interested in what's actually there. Lin nodded. And personally, you came from a background in law enforcement, a fairly sudden departure. What brought you to this work? A series of events that clarified what I valued, Chen Wei said, and what I was willing to do about it. The room was very quiet, the good quiet, the quiet of people paying attention because something real is happening. Lin looked down at his notepad, then up. His face was absolutely steady. Mr. Chen, he said, I want to ask you something that's outside the scope of the program. You can decline to answer. He paused. 4 months ago, you were struck by a vehicle in a street in this city, deliberately according to witnesses. The case was filed and subsequently closed without prosecution. Is that correct? The room changed. Not audibly. A physical change. The change of 400 people simultaneously stopping breathing. Chen Wei held the microphone. He looked at Lin for 1 second, a second of perfect understanding between two men who had planned this and arrived at it and were now standing in it together. Then he looked at the room. "That's correct," he said. "The vehicle involved was registered to a person in this room," Lin said. His voice had not changed. Completely level, completely professional, the voice of a journalist who had been doing this for 20 years and remembered exactly how. Zhou Hao, son of the recently resigned official Zhou Fengshan. He did not look at Zhou Hao's table. He looked at his notepad. The case was closed following intervention from Zhou Fengshan's office. Are you aware of that? I was aware, Chen Wei said. Yes. And you chose not to pursue it through other channels at the time. I was in a hospital, Chen Wei said, and then I was busy. Something in the room, a sound too small to be a sound, a collective physical response. Lin looked up from his notepad and looked at Chen Wei with the clean, precise attention of a journalist conducting a real interview in front of a room that will remember it. And now, Lin said. Chen Wei looked at the room, at the 400 people, at the cameras recording for the regional business channel, at the two people at Zhou Hao's table who had turned involuntarily to look at the young man beside them, at Zhou Hao. Zhou Hao was very still. His face had the color of a man from whom the blood has gone somewhere else, somewhere more internal and more urgent. His hands were on the table. He was looking at Chen Wei and his mouth was slightly open, and he had the specific expression of a man for whom the evening has become something he did not prepare for and cannot exit. Now, Chen Wei said, I'm standing in a room with 400 witnesses and a camera and a journalist who still knows how to ask a real question. He paused. I think that's sufficient. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then it broke, not into chaos, into something more deliberate. The sound of 400 people processing simultaneously, conversations that began in whispers and arrived at normal volume within 30 seconds, camera operators making decisions about where to point their equipment. Zhou Hao stood up from his table. He stood up too fast. The motion of a man whose body has made a decision before his mind could consult on it. His chair went back. The two people beside him went still. The table near him went quiet. He stood there for a moment. In the middle of the room, 400 people looking at him, the camera swinging toward him with the slow inevitability of something that has been well aimed. And he was not a rich playboy or a rising business figure or a son of a powerful official. He was a young man in an expensive suit who had driven a car into a person and gotten away with it until this specific Friday evening when he hadn't. He walked out. Not running, he had enough presence to not run, but fast and rigid and without looking at anyone, and the camera followed him to the door and then back to the stage where Chen Wei was returning the microphone to Lin Jianming with the unhurried movement of a man who has done what he came to do. Lin took the microphone and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chen," and set it down, and that was that. The applause that followed was the kind that comes when a room has witnessed something it didn't expect and has decided collectively that what it witnessed was correct. The clip was online within 40 minutes. Lin's former editor had been in the room, by arrangement the last piece of the machinery that Lin had laid quietly into place over the previous 2 weeks. The clip went up on the publications channel with Lin's byline attached, his first published piece in 3 years, and the headline was precise and factual and devastating. At Business Awards, the question nobody asked, until now. By midnight, it had 100,000 views. By morning, it had 4 times that. Chen Wei's phone received 47 messages between leaving the venue and arriving home, from numbers he recognized and numbers he didn't. He read them in the car. He responded to 5 of them, Fang, Madame Shen, Ms. Jiang, Yue Ning, and his landlord from the Beigang district above the hardware store, who had seen the clip on her daughter's phone and sent a single line. Good. He responded to Mrs. Fang last, and he responded with 2 words. Thank you. The call from Mei Shu came the next morning. He let it ring. It was not avoidance. It was completion. He had said what needed saying in the corridor at the gala. There was nothing in this call that would change anything. The call from Zhou Hao came 20 minutes later. He did not let this one ring. He answered it. Zhou Hao's voice was different from any version Chen Wei had heard before. Not drunk, Sober, which was worse. Sober and stripped of the easy confidence that money and a powerful father had provided as a default operating system, and what was underneath that confidence, without it, was something younger and rawer and more frightened than Chen Wei had anticipated. "I need to talk to you," Zhou Hao said. "You're talking to me." A pause. "Not like this, in person." "No," Chen Wei said. "I can—" He stopped. "There are things I could do to make this—" "Zhou Hao," Chen Wei said. His voice was not unkind. It was simply settled. The voice of a man who has arrived at a place and has no intention of moving from it. "There's nothing you can do. Not because I won't allow it, because it's already done. The case exists in public record now. What happened that night is documented and witnessed, and your name is attached to it in a way that will follow you indefinitely." He paused. "You drove a car into a person and your father made it disappear, and I allowed it to disappear until I was in a position to make it reappear. Now it's reappeared." He paused again. "That's it. Silence on the line." "What do you want?" Zhou Hao said finally. Quiet, almost young. "Nothing from you," Chen Wei said. "Not money, not apology, not a meeting." He looked out the window at the city. "I want you to spend the rest of your life understanding what it costs to do to a person what you did to me. That's all. I can't enforce it, but I think you'll find it unavoidable." He ended the call, set the phone face down on the table, and felt the interface pulse, the warmest it had ever been, the longest, something that felt like a system arriving at a conclusion it had been building toward since a hospital room at 2 a.m. 4 months ago. Authority system. Endgame complete. Liang Guowei, Empire compromised, civil complaint active, regulatory inquiry initiated, business network withdrawn, investors unwinding, checkmark. Zhou Fengshan. Post resigned, social architecture dismantled, internal inquiry active, 20 years of careful construction, gone in 3 weeks, checkmark. Zhou Hao, publicly documented, case on record, name attached to action, consequence permanent and proportionate, your hands clean, checkmark. Method throughout, clean. Above, you did not become them, you became what they cannot reach, checkmark. Plus 10 authority awarded. Final total 100 over 100. Authority maximum. You came in with nothing. You leave with everything. Not because the system gave it to you, because you built it. The system showed you the door. You walked through it yourself. That distinction is everything. Level complete. Apex tier unlocked. New quest loading. The world is larger than one city. He read it in the morning light, sat with it for a long time. The coffee beside him was hot for once. He'd made it slowly, deliberately, because he had time now and intended to use time the way he used everything else, with full attention. 100 points. He thought about the number. Not with pride. Pride was for other people's opinions of you, and he'd stopped organizing his life around other people's opinions the night he'd refused to file an amended report. He thought about it with something more private and more permanent. The satisfaction of a man who has measured a distance, walked it, and arrived where he said he would. His phone had 43 unread messages, 3 new business inquiries through the Qingming advisory contact, a message from Mr. Fang about a meeting next week, one from Madam Shen, brief and precise, "Well done, Thursday dinner, be there." One from Director Kai that said only, "Lin's piece has 200,000 views. He called me this morning. He sounds like himself again." He answered each one in order. Then he called Yue Ning. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," he said. A pause. "All of it?" "All of it." He heard her exhale slowly, not with drama, the exhale of someone who has been holding something on behalf of someone they care about and is now able to put it down. "How do you feel?" He thought about this, actually thought about it, not the performed answer, the real one. "Like a room after the furniture's been moved," he said. "All the space in the right places, and quiet." She was quiet for a moment too, then, "Come over, I'll make something to eat." "Yes," he said. He picked up his jacket. He looked at the apartment, at the photograph on the wall, the staircase with the child shoes. the specific weight of a space where someone had lived and left evidence of the living. Then at the city through the window, the morning light on it, the permanent, indifferent motion of 10 million lives. He thought about the man on the hospital ceiling, the advertisement, the yacht, the Mediterranean light, the laugh that cost nothing. He thought about the man who'd looked at that and made a promise. He was not that man anymore. He was something that man had decided to become, and the deciding had cost more than the man on the ceiling could have imagined, and the arriving was not what he'd imagined either. Not the yacht, not the laugh, not the ease. Something quieter, something that was his own. He picked up his keys. He walked out of the apartment. 3 months after the award ceremony, Chen Wei moved into the penthouse. Not immediately. He'd resisted the obvious symbolism of it for longer than was strictly necessary, which Lin had pointed out with the dry amusement of a man who had watched someone build a tower and then stand at the bottom admiring it. "You've earned the altitude," Lin had said. "Use it." So he'd used it. The apartment occupied the top floor of a building in the Jing'an district, not the tallest building in the city, not the most expensive, but the one with the best view of the thing he actually wanted to see every morning. The city laid out in all directions, unfiltered, the way it looked from a height that made the scale honest rather than overwhelming. From up here you could see the logic of it, the way the districts related to each other, the river's path through the middle of everything, the pattern of light and density and movement that made sense from above in ways it never did from inside. He stood on the terrace on the first morning and looked at it for a long time. Behind him the apartment was mostly empty. He'd moved his things but not yet arranged them, and the specific temporary disorder of a space that hadn't become a home yet was everywhere. Boxes. The photograph of the staircase still wrapped, leaning against the bedroom wall waiting to be hung. The kitchen functional but bare. The living room containing a couch and a view and nothing else that required a decision yet. He was in no hurry. He'd learned that decisions made in the right time held better than decisions made in the available time. He drank his coffee on the terrace and watched the city wake up. The photograph went up on the third day. Yue Ning hung it, her idea, and correct, because she had the eye for placement that he lacked and understood something about how a room should hold its most important thing. She put it on the wall opposite the main window so that the city view in the photograph occupied the same sightline from the couch. You could look at one and then the other without moving. She stepped back and looked at it for a moment. "The shoes," she said. "I know," he said. "They're still the hardest part." "They're supposed to be." She turned and looked at him. In the 3 months since the award ceremony, she had become a consistent presence in his life in the way that real things become consistent. Not dramatically, not with announcements, just through accumulating mornings and evenings and conversations that assumed their own continuity. She was here now more often than not. Her camera bag was on the kitchen counter. 2 of her jackets were in his wardrobe, not because they'd discussed it, but because that was where they'd ended up and neither of them had moved them. She looked at the photograph and then at the city through the window and then at him. "What do you do now?" she said. It was the real question, the question that the last 6 months had been, in some sense, postponing, because the answer while the machinery of the endgame was still running was always this, next, the next thing. Now the machinery had stopped and the question had no more cover. He thought about it. "The same thing," he said, "at a larger scale. And the revenge part?" "That was never the point," he said. "It was the fuel. The destination was always this." He looked at the city. "Something that belongs to me. Something I built without anyone's permission and that no one can take because I didn't borrow the materials from anyone else." He paused. The revenge part was just clarifying. She looked at him for a moment with the evaluating attention she gave everything. "That's a very clean way to remember it." "It's accurate." "It's also slightly sanitized." He looked at her. "All right," he said. It was also satisfying, completely, thoroughly satisfying, in a way I don't apologize for. She held his gaze for a second. Then she smiled. The real one. The one that arrived without announcement. "That's more honest," she said, and went to make tea. Xingming Advisory had, in the 3 months following the award ceremony, become a different kind of organization. Not by design, by the natural consequence of reputation in a city that paid close attention to who had proven they could do what they said they could do. The clip of Lin's interview had 2 million views before it stopped counting. Chen Wei's name had appeared in 4 major business publications. 3 of the city's larger firms had reached out directly, not for the specific operational consulting that had built the business, but for something harder to name and more valuable: the judgment of a person who saw through comfortable arrangements to the thing that was actually true. He had hired 3 people. This was the part that surprised him most, not the hiring but his response to it. He had expected to find management difficult, the translation of what he knew into something other people could execute. Instead, he found that the skills were the same ones he'd developed on the patrol: reading people accurately, understanding what they were actually doing versus what they said they were doing, knowing when to push and when to wait. The uniform had been the costume. The skills had always been his. The 3 people were a financial analyst named Wu Ting, 26, meticulous and slightly underestimated by every room she'd previously occupied, which made her excellent at the kind of work that required people to not see you coming. A strategist named Bao Lei, no relation to Iron Tong, just the coincidence of the city's most common surnames, who had spent 8 years at a consulting firm learning exactly what was wrong with how consulting firms operated and had been waiting, apparently, for someone to do it differently. And a researcher named He Fang, whose methodology reminded Chen Wei of Lin Jianming at his best: thorough, patient, capable of sitting with incomplete information without forcing it into a shape it didn't naturally take. He paid them well. He was specific about what he expected and what he didn't. He told them on the first day, "I will never ask you to do something I haven't thought through completely. In return, I need you to tell me when I'm wrong, because I will be wrong sometimes. And a team that can't say that isn't a team. It's a liability." Wu Ting had said, "How do we know when you're wrong?" He'd said, "The same way you know when anyone is. Pay attention to the reality in front of you and compare it to what's being said about it. If they don't match, say so." She'd looked at him for a moment. Then she'd nodded and opened her laptop and started working, which was the correct response. Lin Jianming had his byline back. This was, of all the outcomes of the past 6 months, the one that gave Chen Wei the purest satisfaction. Not the complicated satisfaction of the endgame, not the mixed satisfaction of watching a man who had tried to have him killed lose his empire, but something simpler and cleaner. A good journalist had been silenced for doing his job correctly and was now doing it again. Lin published twice in the first month after the ceremony. Then a third piece, longer, an investigation into the Port Authority dynamics that had been part of Liang's operation, connected to the civil complaint, legally sound, sourced through the contacts that had been dormant for 3 years and were now available to him again because the people who had made them unavailable were no longer in positions to make things unavailable. The piece ran front section. The editor called it the best thing Lin had written in a decade. Lin called Chen Wei after the call with the editor and said, "You didn't tell me it would feel like this." "I didn't know," Chen Wei said. "I've never had something taken from me and gotten it back." A pause. "Neither had I," Lin said, "until now." They had dinner that Friday. The 4 of them, Lin and Chen Wei and Yue Ning, and a woman named Dr. Su Wen, whom Lin had been seeing for 2 months, with the careful optimism of a man who has decided he is allowed to be happy again. The dinner was at a restaurant in the French concession that was neither trying to impress nor pretending to be less than it was, and the food was excellent, and the conversation went where it wanted without agenda, and it was the kind of evening that Chen Wei filed away carefully in the part of himself that had spent a long time in very cold rooms. Evidence, he thought, that this was worth it. Not the penthouse, not the 100 points, not the business or the name in the right rooms. This, 4 people eating dinner without armor on. This was what the armor had been for. Mr. Fang came to the penthouse on a Tuesday. He arrived exactly on time. Chen Wei had expected nothing else, and stood on the terrace with his coffee and looked at the city with the assessing attention of a man who had built a great deal of what he was looking at in the logistical sense and thought about it accordingly. "The Yangshan situation is fully resolved," he said. "Inspector Liu's documentation standards are now the official protocol for our operation. Our Q3 clearance time is the best in 5 years." "Good," Chen Wei said. I've recommended you to 3 other companies, Fang said. They'll contact you through Madame Shen's network. I told them what to expect. He paused. I also told them what not to expect. Which is? That you'd tell them what they wanted to hear. He sipped his coffee. I told them you'd tell them what was true. I told them that some of them would find that uncomfortable and that the ones who found it most uncomfortable were probably the ones who needed it most. He glanced at Chen Wei's sidelong. Half of them will be useless to you. The other half will be the beginning of something significant. Chen Wei looked at the city. I know, he said. Fang looked at him. You're not surprised. No. You're not gratified either. I'm grateful, Chen Wei said. That's different from gratified. Fang considered this. You're 28 years old, he said. It had the quality of a man noting something that surprised him, not about the number, but about what it contained. Yes. I started with 1 truck, Fang said. He'd said it once before, in his office, on the day Chen Wei had first presented the Yangshan analysis. He said it differently now, not as a parallel, as a recognition. I didn't know what I was doing for the first 3 years. I learned it as it happened. He paused. You came in knowing. I came in with nothing, Chen Wei said. The knowing came from the nothing. Fang was quiet for a moment. Then he put down his coffee and said, I want to talk to you about an investment, not a referral, a direct investment in Qingming Advisory, not control. I'm not interested in running things. I have enough things to run. A minority position with board observation rights. He turned to look at Chen Wei fully. You're going to need capital for what comes next. I'd rather it come from someone who understands what you're building than from someone who will spend the next 3 years trying to understand it. Chen Wei looked at him. He had expected this and or something like it, but not so directly, and the directness was its own kind of respect, and he received it accordingly. I'll have my lawyer send terms, he said. If they're acceptable, we'll sign before the month is out. Fang nodded once, the nod of a man who has said what he came to say and is comfortable with what comes next. He picked up his coffee and turned back to the view. Good building, he said, meaning the city, meaning everything. Madame Shen's Thursday dinner was 30 people in a room that operated like a small, precise machine for making things happen between people who had the capacity to make things happen. Chen Wei had been to 6 of them now. He knew the rhythm, the first 40 minutes of open circulation, the seated dinner where the conversation moved around the table with the managed freedom of a river that has banks, but is nonetheless a river. The post-dinner movement back to circulation where the real business happened in the informal space that serious dinner had created. He was, by the 6th dinner, no longer a new face. He was part of the architecture, one of the people others calibrated themselves against when they arrived, one of the reference points the room used to orient itself. This had happened gradually and then all at once, the way things that compound work. Madame Shen found him near the end of the evening, as she always did. She reserved her direct conversation for the end, by which point she had observed everything she needed to observe and arrived at the position she intended to arrive at. How is Yue Ning's commission coming? She asked. The Suzhou project is done. She's finishing the editing. He paused. The book has a publisher. Madame Shen's expression did something warm. She found one herself. She found one herself, he said. She didn't ask me to do anything about it, and I didn't offer. Good, Madame Shen said, with the approval of a woman who understood the specific importance of that. She looked at him for a moment. You've changed, she said, since the gala. Have I? Not in the obvious ways. The obvious ways were already there. She tilted her head slightly. Something settled. Most people your age are still reaching. You look like someone who has arrived somewhere and is deciding what to build there. She paused. It's an unusual quality. I've seen it twice before in 40 years of this room. Chen Wei waited. Both times, she said, the person it belonged to built something that the city still uses and still will be using long after anyone remembers who built it. She picked up her glass. That seems right for you. She moved back into the room. Chen Wei stood with the city below and thought about buildings, about the photograph on his wall. The staircase, the shoes, the presence of people rendered as their absence. About Yue Ning's 12,000 photographs of things that no longer existed except in the documentation of someone who had thought they were worth documenting. About the lane houses in the Shikumen district that would come down in 2 months and be towers in 2 years. About what lasted. He had thought in the hospital room that he wanted to be untouchable, that he wanted to be high enough that nothing could reach him. This was true, and it had been a useful thing to want because it had driven the climb. But standing on the other side of it, he understood that untouchable was not the thing, not the real thing. The real thing was this: to build something that existed independently of whether anyone could touch him. Something that would be there after the people who had tried to stop him had been forgotten. That was the project. That was what came next. He opened the interface for the first time in 2 weeks on the night after Fang's visit. It came differently now. Not the cold, blue-white urgency of the hospital room, not the steady operational pulse of the climb. Something quieter. The interface of a system that had completed one phase and was preparing without hurry for the next. Authority system. User, Chen Wei. Authority, 100 over 100. Maximum status, Apex tier. Current assets, Qingming Advisory, active scaling. Team, 3, Wu Ting / Baolei / Heifang. Investment, Fang, pending terms. Network, Tier 1, Fang / Shen / Kai. Liquid capital, 2.3 million yen. Reputation, city level, established. Personal, Yue Ning, present. Lin Jianming, restored. Mrs. Fang, she knows. Completed. Stand check. Ghost check. First money. Check the image. Check. Sphere of influence. Check the room. Check. Endgame. Check. 6 months ago, you were on a kitchen floor. You were in a hospital bed. You had 4,200 yen and a cast and a view of a white ceiling and no one in the chair. Look at where the chair is now. He read it slowly. Then he looked at the apartment. At the city through the window, night now, the lights of 10 million lives, the river running through the middle of all of it, the permanent indifferent beauty of a place that had been here before him and would be here after. At the photograph on the wall, the staircase, the shoes on the third step, at the second chair on the terrace, where Yue Ning had left her jacket on the back because she'd be here in the morning. He looked at the chair for a long moment. Not empty. He closed his eyes. Let the 6 months settle, not as a story he was telling, not as a sequence of victories to be cataloged, but as the actual experience of it. The kitchen floor, the hospital ceiling, Mrs. Fang's unasking eyes, the noodle shop and Lin's annotated newspaper, Mr. Chung's tape measure, Madame Shen crossing a room, the gala and Liang Guowei's face doing its recalculation, the corridor and Mei Shu's eyes understanding something about a door that had already closed, the award ceremony and 400 people going very quiet. He let all of it be exactly what it was. Then he opened his eyes and opened the interface again. Authority system. Apex tier active. The city is yours. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of what you have built and what you are capable of from this position. But the city is not the limit. New quest. The world is larger than one city. Objective. Establish Qingming. Advisory in 3 international markets within 18 months. Secondary objective. Become the kind of person that borders do not contain. Reward. Unlocks at completion. He read it, felt the shape of it, the familiar architecture of a challenge laid out cleanly, a distance defined, a direction established. He was about to close the interface when it pulsed again. Something different, not a quest notification. The quality was different, the color slightly altered, the edges harder, an alert rather than a prompt. Priority. Alert classification, Alpha. An entity has been monitoring your ascent since day 1. Not Liang Guowei, not Zhou Fengshan, not their operation, someone above them. Assessment. Liang Guowei did not have the political access to have you terminated inside 24 hours. That speed required a contact at a level above Zhou Fengshan. Zhou Fengshan did not have the financial leverage to keep Liang Guowei's gun charge buried without external support. That support came from somewhere. The civil complaint against Liang's operation has produced 3 witnesses who have referenced independently a third party, unknown, unnamed, the entity that introduced Liang to the port infrastructure he exploited. This entity was aware of your arrest of Liang Guowei within 90 minutes, before your chief superintendent received his instructions. Current status of entity: unknown. Known, they are watching. Known, they have resources that dwarf Liang and Zhou combined. Known, you have been on their radar since the night of the Bentley. Known, they have not acted against you. Unknown, why? New quest activated. Find the architect. The man who built the structure you dismantled is still standing. He is not afraid of you. Not yet. Warning: this target operates at a level you have not reached yet. City level is insufficient. The next quest requires international infrastructure before it can be approached safely. Complete, the world is larger than one city. First, then come back to this. One more thing. The entity knows where you live. They sent you something. It arrived this afternoon while you were out. Check the door. Chen Wei read it once. He set the phone down, stood up from the couch and walked to the front door of the apartment and looked at the floor in front of it. An envelope, cream-colored, heavy stock, the kind of paper that cost more per sheet than most people's lunch. No return address, no name on the front, just the apartment number, written in small, precise handwriting that communicated an absolute confidence in being understood without elaboration. He picked it up, turned it over. The seal on the back was a simple embossed circle, no logo, no initials, just a circle pressed into the wax with the clean indifference of something that didn't need to announce itself because what it was would be understood upon arrival. He held it for a moment. Thought about the Bentley in the night of the arrest, and Liang Guowei saying you have no idea what you just did on a wet pavement at 2 a.m. in the casual certainty of a man relaying a fact rather than making a threat. He had not known what he'd done. He was beginning to understand. He walked back to the couch, sat down, looked at the city through the window, at the lights, the river, the enormous churning permanence of it. He turned the envelope over in his hands, once, twice. Then he set it on the table in front of him. He was not going to open it tonight, not because he was afraid. He wasn't afraid. Because he understood with the calm strategic clarity that 4 months of building had given him, and that the system had been teaching him since a hospital ceiling at 2 a.m., that the right time to open a thing was not always the first available moment. The envelope had arrived. That was its move. His move was to choose when to respond to it, and his choice was not now. Now was something else. He picked up his phone and called Yue Ning. She answered on the second ring. He could hear the city in her background. She was out, the acoustic signature of the Hongkou district at night, the traffic and distance of it. "Something's come up," he said. "Can you come over?" A pause. Good something or complicated something? He looked at the envelope on the table, at the city through the window, at the photograph on the wall, the staircase, the shoes, the evidence of people who had been and left their mark. "Both," he said. "Bring your camera." She laughed, the real one, surprised out of her. "Why my camera?" "Because I think we're at the beginning of something," he said, "and you're the one who knows how to document things worth remembering." A pause. He heard her moving, the sound of a jacket being picked up, a door. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. "I'll be here," he said. He ended the call, set the phone down beside the envelope, looked at both of them. The city below was doing what it always did. Churning, glittering, indifferent, magnificent. The largest room he'd ever been in and the one he understood the best now. He had walked its streets at 2 a.m. for 3 years, keeping it safe, and it had thanked him by teaching him what safety actually cost and who actually paid for it, and what a man could build from the paying. He had built from the paying. He was not done building. He picked up his old police badge from the kitchen counter where it had been sitting since the day he'd moved in. He'd brought it from the previous apartment without deciding to, which told him something about what it meant that he hadn't fully articulated yet. He held it in his hand for a moment. The weight of it, familiar. The feel of it against his palm. The specific texture of a thing that had once been his identity and was now something else. Not a relic, not a wound. Just evidence of a distance traveled. He set it down beside the envelope. The two things side by side on his table, where he'd started, where he was. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked at the city, then at the photograph, then back at the table. He thought, I came in with nothing and left with everything, and whatever is in that envelope is the beginning of the next thing, and the next thing is going to require everything I've built and more than I can currently imagine, and I am completely, absolutely ready for it. He thought, Yue Ning is 20 minutes away. He thought Lin will want to know about this in the morning. He thought, the world is larger than one city. He thought about the man on the yacht in the advertisement, the Mediterranean light, the easy laugh, and found to his mild surprise that he no longer thought about him at all. That image had been a destination once, a direction to aim at when he had no other direction. He had aimed at it and then passed through it on the way to something he hadn't had the vocabulary for yet, when he was lying on a hospital ceiling with 4,200 yen and a broken arm and a white ceiling and an empty chair. He had the vocabulary now. He sat on the couch in the penthouse with the city below and the photograph on the wall and the envelope on the table and his badge beside it, and he was 28 years old and entirely himself, and he waited for the door to open. 23 minutes later it did. Yue Ning came in with her camera bag on one shoulder and her jacket still on, and her hair the way it was when she hadn't thought about it, which was when it was best. She saw the envelope on the table immediately. She saw everything immediately. It was the quality that had made her a photographer, and she looked at it and then at him. That's what came up, she said. Not a question. Part of it. She set her bag down, sat beside him on the couch, and looked at the envelope with the particular quality of attention she gave things she was trying to understand. Are you going to open it? Tomorrow, he said. She looked at him. Why tomorrow? Because tonight I want to sit here with you and look at the city and not think about what's in it. He paused. Is that all right? She looked at him for a moment, the evaluating look, the one that went all the way in, and then she leaned back against the couch and looked at the city through the window. Yes, she said simply. They sat in the quiet of the apartment, the city below doing its permanent thing, the photograph on the wall holding its permanent weight, the envelope on the table containing whatever it contained. After a while, Yue Ning picked up her camera from its bag, not to shoot, just to hold, the way some people hold a book without opening it. She looked at the photograph on the wall. The shoes are different from up here, she said. He looked. Are they? The perspective. From the couch you see them differently than from the door. She tilted her head slightly. The staircase goes up from this angle. From the door it goes down. He looked at this for a moment. The photograph unchanging, its meaning shifting with the vantage point. Most things do, he said. She looked at him. He looked at the city. Outside it was deep night, the specific hour when the city had committed to its darkness, and the light in the windows was the light of people who had reasons to be awake or couldn't help it. The river ran through the middle of all of it, moving the same direction it had always moved, indifferent to what was built on its banks, patient with everything that came and went and came again. Chen Wei looked at it and felt for the first time in 6 months something that was simply peace, not the absence of the next thing. The next thing was there. It was always there. The envelope was on the table and the world was larger than one city, and the entity who had been watching since the night of the Bentley was somewhere out there in that larger world with resources that dwarfed what he'd dismantled. None of that was absent. All of it was there. But it could wait until morning. Tonight the city was below and Yue Ning was beside him and the photograph was on the wall and his badge was on the table next to an envelope from someone who thought they were ready for him, and he was 28 years old and entirely alive, and he had come from nothing and built everything, and whatever came next he would build that too. He was very sure of this. He was very calm. Outside the river ran. The city turned over in its sleep. The lights held steady against the dark. Chen Wei sat in the high quiet of the life he had made and let the night be what it was. End of Part 7. End of Authority System, Book 1. Authority System, Book 1. Complete Authority, 100 over 100. Status, Apex Tier. The city, his. The world, next. Book 2, Find the Architect coming.